Ready?
Hi there, everybody. Good morning. Can you all hear me in the room at least? Yes? Can you hear me now? Better? Perfect. Okay, before we actually start the conference, I have a few housekeeping details to go over. And first and foremost, of the people in the room, the men and women's restroom are beyond the double doors to the back of you, and it's to the left. There's also a water fountain there. And if you need to use them before the actual breaks, please go through the double doors. Okay? And for those of you who have not emailed me the privacy notices and the copyright documents, please email them to me either today or at least by tomorrow. And this is just another reminder that the sessions will be recorded and it'll be available 7 days from now on the BIS website. So as this is a hybrid conference, we will have questions online, but the priority will be given to everyone in the room first. And if you need to ask a question, please raise your hand and someone will bring a microphone to you and wait until you have the microphone in your hand, and so that you can, the people online can hear you. And I would suggest that you also state your name and the company that you represent for the people online. And the food and beverage or other refreshments will be towards the double doors, but in front of the Herbert Hoover desk, and that's a very historical desk from the building that was named after him. He was a Secretary of Commerce, I believe, in the 1930s or 40s. So don't quote me on that one. I have to look up Google search to find the actual dates itself. Wi-Fi will be available, but it's very limited, and unfortunately it's only for the library staff. So if you have Wi-Fi hotspots yourself, you may use them, okay? And the lobby beyond the doors is available to you for making phone calls and things that you need to step out of the room. So the double doors can be closed so there won't be any interference. And don't forget that an official photo will be taken at the end of this first day of the conference. And before everybody leave the building, please wait around for a while, and then we'll have a group photo probably in front of the screen, okay? So I'm done with the housekeeping part of it. Oh, yes, and thank you again for your attention. So I will start with my welcome speech at this point. So welcome everybody. My name is Betty Lee, and I'm with the Bureau of Industry and Security. I'm the co-organizer of the first Emerging Technology Brain-Computer Interface Conference in the Department of Commerce. I want to welcome everyone to DC, and thank you for bringing wonderful warm weather for us for this whole week. We really appreciate that. And we're very pleased to have you guys here, really. I'll give you a bit of the history of how this all started. So the idea for this conference began about a few months ago, and it culminated in February 2023 after juggling potential speakers, site schedule, and so on. And due to that, I would also like to thank Matt Engel and his team, especially Violet and Babette, at Paradromics, for inviting the leaders of the industry. Yes, give them a loud hand of applause. Thank you. They did a fantastic job, and they're able to get leaders from the BCI community to participate in this conference. I'm actually overwhelmed by the interest and enthusiasm shown by the industry and academia, patient advocates, think tanks, government agencies, and the public. So it culminated with a lot of emails getting to my inbox, but that's okay. Now I know that there is such a general interest for this particular topic. So the goal of this conference is meant as a two-way dialogue between the BCI industry and government regulators. So we hope to learn from each other the promises of BCI, the challenges faced by patients who need BCI to alleviate their illness, critical innovations for the progress of BCI, invasive and non-invasive types of BCI, use of BCI for gaming or entertainment purposes, potential dual-use capabilities for the software, algorithms, convergence of AI and machine learning and hardware. So I envision this 2 days to have a lot of wonderful discussions and in-depth dialogue, basically. And we hope to gain a better knowledge for this 2-day hybrid conference. And that's it for my remarks, and I turn it over to Karen Rommelfanger, who will be the moderator for the whole event, for the 2-day hybrid event. So let's welcome Karen for taking on this job as a moderator. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Betty, and good morning to everybody. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be able to facilitate this ambitious agenda put forward by Violet and Betty, who have very heroically, with the Paradromics team and Department of Commerce team, collaboratively worked to create a stellar roster of speakers. So I'm Karen Rommelfanger. I'm a neurotech ethicist and strategist, and I'm a retired academic neuroscientist and also a retired bioethicist and neuroethicist. And I recently moved on to launch with some of my colleagues here the first international think and do tank dedicated wholly to neuroethics, which explores the ethical, legal, and social implications of neurotechnology and how to best address them. We now know that foundational features of human experience can be changed by disease, injury, and now neurotechnology. And as such, how and which context we deploy these technologies warrants deep reflection and measured action. While national security is the focus for today, it's important to note that our discussions today reflect a larger global discussion around neurotechnology and how to responsibly and ethically innovate for the greatest positive impact for society. For the context of today, the BIS invited public comment via the Federal Register on BCI export control. And although the response was limited, respondents raised issues and concerns related not only to ethical implications of neurotechnologies, but also what harms might come to patients, innovation enterprises, and the U.S. economy without deeper consideration of careful export control. Today's events extend that conversation to a broader group in the room today and also virtually. And to create responsible democratic science for all requires talking openly and engaging diverse audiences to share their perspectives and possibilities for a future that they would like. And I believe today's work reflects that kind of commitment. To be clear, the workshop will not likely lead to definitive conclusions on questions put forth in the Federal Register by BIS or by the respondents. However, it will lay the necessary foundation to be able to create a viable strategy to addressing these questions and potential BCI export control. As Betty mentioned, the goals today are to establish a path forward. The first day is dedicated largely to an exploration of the state of the art in neurotechnology with a strong clinical focus. And the second day is to help raise awareness of ethical issues and mitigation strategies related to export control and dual use. Hopefully today is the beginning of a longer conversation in establishing a path forward, as we will need a cross-sectoral community of stakeholders who systematically work on these issues and forge a collaborative path forward that leads to advancing ethical neurotechnology for everyone. There's a remarkable roster of speakers in this room today who have taken precious time to participate in this event, both in person and virtually. And I've gotten permission from Violet and Betty to stop you in the middle of a really great conversation if you're going over time. So I'm going to be mean about that. But right now I'm going to give you the opportunity. So speakers in the audience, do I have your permission to cut you off to keep you on time out of respect for all the participants here in person and virtually? Okay, you heard it. You heard it here. Okay, so I'll have a timer here. I'll be keeping time for speakers. I'll give you a 2 and 1 signal as we get closer. And out of camera view, I'll probably be poking an umbrella at you or something like that to make you stop. And that will be how we run today. And this is the first of this kind of an endeavor with Department of Commerce. So we're really thrilled to be piloting this with you today. And we're going to have a little bit of background now from leaders from the Department of Commerce. Are they here? Yes. Okay. And without further ado, Alan Estevez and Tongeli. Yeah, you're good to go.
And I'd like to introduce everybody to the Undersecretary of the Bureau of Industry and Security, Alan Estevez, to make his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Betty. And I am going to be short in my remarks so that you don't have to poke me with an umbrella or do whatever you're going to do. And actually, because it's more important to have the dialogue that you're going to have than listen to what I'm going to say, to tell you the truth. But I do want to thank you all for coming today. I mean, I think having academia, practitioners, patient advocates, and our own regulators here is an important part of this process. But I'm going to ask a question. So I'm going to make this interactive, which you don't normally have in opening remarks, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why are you guys here? And the reason I'm asking that question, and I think it's important that you are here. First of all, you know, I had the opportunity in one of my past jobs to oversee the Department of Defense's laboratory system, including DARPA. So I got to work with a lot of people who worked on things like brain-computer interface and other really cool things. And my experience in the past is when you get people who are really bright and really cool on a particular scientific breakthrough area, what they don't want to hear is from the regulator. Or frankly, from anyone else until they get their work done. They want to hear from their peers and they want to hear from the people who are engaged in the research with them. But what they don't want to hear from is some guy who's going to come along and say, whatever it is you're doing, you can't talk to anyone else about it outside of like this little narrow phase. But I'm going to tell you why it's important that you think about that as you go through. I think, Karen, you kind of alluded to some of that in your opening remarks. You know, when we put out the notice for comments on BCI, we got back 8 comments. It's not a lot. And some of those comments basically said, don't bother us because you're going to hurt innovation. I'm paraphrasing there. Some of them were terser than that. And okay, I got it. And frankly, I don't want to impair innovation. I think it's important that we do have the breakthroughs that are necessary in this space. You know, it's good for mankind. It's good for the country. It's good for the economy. It's good for all sorts of things. But the flip side of that, and here's why it's important that we have this discussion. The flip side of that is I'm going to quote from a federal notice, Federal Register notice that we put out. Let me talk about the Federal Register real quick. I'm going to do an aside here. You know, I recognize 8 comments, seems like none, but I also recognize that people who are engaged in cutting-edge research mostly don't sit around reading the Federal Register. That's not what they spend their time looking at. Some of them don't even know it exists, because why would they? It's not something they have to deal with, right? So, you know, we have to think about better ways of reaching out to breakthrough communities like this one. And again, that's why it's important that we're all here together, both in the room and virtually. But, we put a number of Chinese entities on something called the Entity List. The Entity List is, the press calls it a blacklist. It's not really that, but it's a licensing regimen so we can see what companies are trying to import to themselves. And in some cases, it truly does act as a blacklist because we say there's nothing you can do to get a license. And we put 11 Chinese entities under the Chinese Academy of Military Medical Sciences and research institutions on the entity list. I should watch my own terminology there. And what the Federal Register notice said, what is based on the body of information that AMMS and 11 research institutes use biotechnology processes to support Chinese military end users to include purported brain control weaponry. This activity is contrary to U.S. national security and foreign policy concerns. Brain control weaponry. So we have, BCI being used for beneficial things like ALS research and the like. And then I have people thinking Superman in combat. And that is not good for the United States. It's not good for our allies. It's not good for the world in general. Again, I come from a defense background where my job in my past was ensuring that U.S. forces, the U.S. military, had the best weaponry in the world so that anytime we went into a fight, we had what we call overmatch, that the adversary would have less weaponry and not as sophisticated and not as capable, so that we were able to protect American lives and the lives of our allies and hopefully defeat the enemy in doing that. And what we don't want is to send U.S. forces into a situation where that is not the case. And so you look at events in the world today, you look at what's going on in Ukraine, where an autocrat in Russia, Putin, on a whim decided to invade a sovereign nation and is inflicting great pain on that nation, who are fighting bravely, backed up by the West, by our NATO allies and our Asian allies in their fight there. But that just shows what an autocrat can do and can take science to a bad end instead of a good end. So think about that, and you can think about other areas of the world where there's turmoil and threats and autocracies that can threaten the United States and its allies. And it's important while we talk about using science to the good, not to the bad, and why we might have to put some kind of regulatory regime over some part of that science so that your good work does not go to a bad end in a bad nation. And that's the bottom line of why we're all here today. It's the job of what we do at BIS. So I want to encourage you all to have an open, free dialogue today. I think this is really important. We do have a role in looking at emerging technologies and seeing what kind of regulatory regime we might need to put on them. Again, I'm not saying here what we might do. I don't know, frankly. And that's why it's important. So Betty, thank you for bringing this group together. Thank you all for being here. Look forward to the output of your great work, and have a great 2 days. Someone's probably supposed to come up.
And we continue to the next speaker, Dr. Tongele from the Bureau of Industry and Security, and he will continue to give you an idea of why we are interested in all these emerging technologies following Alan's speech. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I cannot help but really thank you all for being here, and those online. Give yourself a warm hand, please. I want to thank Dr. Betty Lee, the IT, all the BIS employees who worked so hard to put this thing together, the library hosting us, those who provided us with breakfast and water, and there are those who will not even see here. So please give them all a warm hand. Well, you know, I thought about the brain-computer interface, and I thought, well, let me test my two daughters, 13 and 15. So I told them, listen, I'm going to say brain-computer interface, and you tell me what comes to your mind. So I said, okay, brain-computer interface, you, and say power. I said, that's interesting. So I said, you, I said, money. I said, brain-computer interface, you, I said, Instagram. And the other, brain-computer interface, you, Disney. I say, brain-computer interface, you, confusion. Brain-computer interface, you, money. And then listen to this. I said, brain-computer interface, one say, mess. And I say, what about you, mystery? Then I told myself, well, what makes you think all these things? You taught us to say what comes to our mind. So I think maybe all this is part of the brain-computer interface, you know. But I just wanted to share that this is it's a new area. It has so much promise. But also, what is not known sometimes also scares a little bit. The truth of the matter that I want to say here is this. We can trade in technology. We can trade in technology. But we cannot trade American technological leadership. You are at the forefront of American technological leadership. That's why the United States Department of Commerce wants and needs to work with you to ensure that your innovations are protected. Protecting your innovation is a priority number one for the U.S. Department of Commerce. In doing that, one of the means is the export control. You know the word export control. Control is always some kind of frightening thing. And I prefer to say licensing. Let's say you have your product, you have your technology. You would like to sell it outside the United States, and it qualifies for license, then you come ask for a license. And before that, you have done your due diligence. You know where it is going, who is receiving it, and for doing what. And when you come for license, we at Commerce, along with other government agencies and the intelligence community, we will do further due diligence to ensure that your technology is going to a legitimate end user, for legitimate end users, so you can get good and clean money. That's what we want you to have, make money. What would commerce be without trade? So the least we can do is to ensure that you do good trade that is favorable to you. You make good money. And good money means good economy. Good economy is a strength. And actually, you are job creators. I believe so. To protect your innovation you have invested so much in, BIS used export control. In 2018, the Congress of the United States enacted the Export Control Reform Act. And Section 1758 of the Export Control Reform Act gave Commerce authority to establish appropriate control on the export and the re-export of emerging and foundational technologies that are essential to the national security of the United States. The same year, Commerce published what is called Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. It's a public document generally for seeking your comment, public comment, the general public and technology developers like you. So this 2018 Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking published by Commerce on emerging technology, it was to seek comment from you on how to go about identifying and controlling emerging technologies. And in that document, 14 general area of technology were listed. We call them technology categories. And one of these 14 areas is the brain-computer interface. So it's not great that we are here today to deal with this. The question that comes to mind is, what about before 2018? Were technology controlled at all? Of course, yes. The United States, with like-minded allies, through the multilateral export control regimes, have always identified and controlled dual-use technologies that are usable for the development or production of conventional weapons, nuclear weapons, chemical biological weapons, or missiles. And the four major multilateral export control regimes that you know are the Wassenaar Arrangement. Maybe you heard about that, which started in 1995 and focuses on the control of dual-use items and technology used for conventional weapons. It has 42 member countries. The Nuclear Suppliers Group, which started in 1992, focuses on nuclear items, transaction and commercialization of these dual-use nuclear items, and it has 48 member countries. Then you have the Australia Group, which designates it started in 1985, and it's for control of chemical and biological products that are used for development of chemical weapons. And it has 42 member countries. And then the Missile Technology Control Regime, which started in 1987 and focuses on the export control for missile products that are used for developing and deploying missiles. So you can see 1992, 87, this predates 2018. Therefore, and the United States has always been either founding member or member of these multilateral export control regimes. So commerce through the United States has always been active in identifying and controlling technology. So you can see this collaboration at international level. Why is that the United States want to collaborate with? Why not just go ahead and control as many things as possible? You can't do that. You know why? We don't want to put you in a disadvantaged position. Because if we control in the United States alone and others don't control, then hey, entities of concern, countries of concern don't care. You can keep it. We buy it in another country because they are making the same thing. So regulations are more effective when applied multilaterally in consensus with other like-minded countries and partners. However, if there is an urgency to protect the American people, if there's an urgency for national security, the United States of America will not hesitate to unilaterally establish a control on something that is considered to be so essential to the national security of the United States. That's not the norm, but if needed, it must be done. So, as you can see, rulemaking for emerging technology is something that is consensus-based, international collaboration. And nationally, we rely on you, the forefront fighter for national security through your innovations, because you are the first one who do the due diligence. We must collaborate with you nationally. And this is very important. So the BCI conference feeds in this process of commerce collaborating with national technology developers and stakeholders. So we look forward, really, we not only appreciate you, but we look forward to the discussions that we come from these 2 days talk, which will be so crucial in helping in this challenge of properly identifying emerging and foundational technology that are essential to the national security of the United States. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'm really pumped for this event now. This is exciting. Okay, so now we'll enter into the portion of the discussions where we got a little bit of background on the history of the export control of this particular call for BCI export control. And now we're going to get a patient and advocacy, lived experience advocate perspective on how BCIs have changed their lives and the kinds of things that they foresee are needs in the future. Okay, and first up is Jen French, who is founder and director of Neurotech Network. Take it away, Jen.
Thanks, Karen. And thank you for those introductions. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I will reassure you, those that are from the Department of Commerce, as you have gathered together a group of people that are incredibly passionate. So we're not just here for the money, but there's a lot of passion in the room, both, I'm sure, in that room as well as virtually. So my apologies that I can't join you in person today. I really do wish I could be there, but I appreciate the opportunity to join you virtually. What you can see on the screen is that I'm a white female with short curly hair. I'm wearing an olive sweater with a blue scarf, and I have a large map of the world behind me. But what you can't see visually is that I'm a wheelchair user, and I've been living with tetraplegia for 25 years, and 24 of those years I've been using an implanted neural prosthesis that allows me to use my paralyzed muscles. Since 2005, the Neurotech Network has a mission of education and advocacy towards neurotechnologies, particularly for those that are the therapies, the treatments, and the devices that are under development. And part of that mission is to really understand the human experience with technologies. So starting off today, I'd like to have you imagine with me, either close your eyes, bow your head, and think of this. So it's a beautiful spring day. You're a single parent of 2 teenagers, and you devote your life to them. But one of your outlets and one of your passions is gardening. So on this particular spring day, you're outdoors with your teenage son, tending to your garden, preparing for the spring planting season. And you're both getting a little warm, and you decide that you want to go inside and take a short break. So your son goes in to check the basketball scores, and you step inside and feel a little lightheaded, a little nauseous. And you decide that you're going to go up the steps into your bedroom and lay down for a few minutes. And as you approach the top of the steps, your foot starts to shake, and suddenly you fall to the floor. Your son finds you, puts a pillow under your head, and goes to call for help. And as you lie there on the floor, looking up at the ceiling, you're realizing that you suddenly can't move. And suddenly you are in the body of a mannequin. You're frozen. You can see, you can hear, but you can't respond. You can't move. You can't express what you're thinking, and you can't speak. Your mind is working, but you can't react to the outside world except through blinks of your eyes. What you have just had is a brainstem stroke, and you have fallen into a condition called locked-in syndrome. That's the story of Kathy Hutchinson. At the age of 43, as a single parent of 2 teenagers, she had a brainstem stroke and ended up with locked-in syndrome. Kathy Hutchinson went on to become one of the early bionic pioneers of an implanted BCI, a brain-computer interface, and it opened up a whole world to her where she can actually interact with the world. She had the ability to communicate what she was thinking, and that meant the world to her. She later went on to be able to use that technology to manipulate a robotic arm to drink her beloved cinnamon lattes. And Kathy really wants and wanted her story to be told for people to hear her story, but also to hear the stories of others that you're going to hear from today and tomorrow. And this story is about impact. It's about how these types of technologies can impact people, not only here in the US, but also around the world. Because brain interfaces is actually a global initiative. In early 2017, key players joined at the UN headquarters for the creation of the International Brain Initiative. And later in December of that year, there was a declaration of intent to create the Global Brain Alliance. And it included countries for the like of Australia, Japan's Minds Project, Korean's Brain Initiative, the Human Brain Project of the EU, and yes, the US Brain Initiative. And this effort wasn't just about investment, it was about a global collaboration for a movement in the development of brain interface technologies. And this is a bold initiative. In fact, we're solving real problems to understand the frontier of the human brain and the human nervous system. Prior to COVID, neurological disorders were the second leading cause of death worldwide. With 276 million disability-adjusted life years, it's the leading cause of disability around the world. And here at home, in a study published by JAMA, nearly 100 million Americans are affected by at least one neurological disorder, and that's translating to over $700 billion in economic costs to us. So these are real problems globally, but also here at home. So as we approach this topic and we talk about this over the next 2 days, I want to leave you with a word of caution to let you know that to not fall into the whole of hype around brain interfaces, around human augmentation and human performance. Don't allow those outliers that use scare tactics that are not based on true facts. But I encourage you to really approach this with mindful opportunity and mission. Because these applications are impacting people in the human experience. They don't only allow for communications like it did for Kathy, but think about how it can help solve real issues like mental health, cognition, sensation, vision, auditory, and yes, even movement. Let's think beyond the capabilities of the current BCIs, especially if we are developing policies for the future. That really we're here to gain a better understanding of not just the medical applications of today, but the future implications of other brain technologies into the future. Think about how partnering with diverse stakeholders can help shape our public narrative, but also how we are developing technologies for and about the human experience. So as you go through the proceedings, I ask you to think about Kathy Hutchinson, to think about me, and to think about the other bionic pioneers that you're going to hear from today, tomorrow, and in the course of your work towards shaping policy. And please, while you're going through all of this work, please consider how your actions can impact the human experience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen, for that powerful opening to this section. Next, we have Ian Burkhart of the Ian Burkhart Foundation.
Should be on. Yep. Hi, everyone. I want to definitely thank Betty Lee and her team for getting this together, as well as Matt Engel and his team for getting this together, because I think it's just such an important thing, because I've seen firsthand how BCI technology can improve the lives of individuals with disabilities. And that's really why I'm here today, is to share that experience that I had. I was 19 years old and on vacation when I was swimming in the ocean. I took a dive into a sandbar. At that point, I instantly was paralyzed and could not feel anything. I remember, being face down in the water, not knowing if my life story would be over there or not. And that was a lot for me to process, and it took some time to adjust. And going through standard care of physical therapy and rehabilitation, I was able to make some gains and be able to do more things for myself. I was able to drive a power wheelchair. I'm able to, feed myself with some adaptive utensils. But I always knew that the lack of use of my hands was really what was holding me back substantially. And I was always looking for something more because I wasn't pleased with the rehabilitation and treatment that I received. It was great. I had great care, but I knew that there needed to be more to improve my quality of life so that I could continue on with those hopes and dreams that I had as a 19-year-old being a freshman in college. That led to me asking all of my doctors and therapists, what can I do to look forward to the future, and what types of research is going on that I could potentially take part in or potentially benefit from in the future. And I was insistently bugging them about what that should be because they're the ones that should know, right? When in reality, it's definitely challenging for practicing clinicians to be up to date on the latest publications and research. But I was really in the right place at the right time because there was a research study being done at the hospital that I was already receiving care, which was Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. And that's where I was first introduced to the idea of using a brain-computer interface to control muscle stimulation to restore hand function. And like I mentioned earlier, hand function was something for me that really would unlock that next level of me being as independent as possible and not needing to rely on other people to help me do daily tasks. So it was something that I was certainly excited about. It required me to have and consent for a brain surgery to have a device implanted, also to have the device explanted at the end of the study. And that was something that was certainly a concern. My family members did think I was a little crazy because I just had about 3.5 years prior sustained a completely traumatic injury that changed my life, and now I wanted to risk it again for something that may or may not work. It mostly won't benefit me personally, but I was able to participate in this research, and that was something that I knew I really had to do because I had this fantastic opportunity. With that, we were using the BCI, like I said, to drive functional electrical stimulation on my hand. I was able to move individual fingers. I was able to move wrist movements. And that combined with the residual movement that I still had in my shoulder really allowed me to do a lot more. Now, this was something that I was only able to do in the lab. I was, especially at the beginning, we were tethered it to the stimulation machine, and I could really only move my arm around in like a 18-inch area. So not super practical, right? But it showed me that this was possible. And I was able to work with some fantastic people that were all sorts of specialties, from the medical doctors and the neurosurgeons who implanted the device, to some of the electrical engineers and biomedical engineers that helped design the muscle stimulation and also connecting that to the brain-computer interface. Also, I was able to work with some data scientists and neuroscientists that were able to make sense of all this data. One of the wildest things to me was being asked, okay, think about moving your hand. That's something I really never thought about. I didn't have recollection of when I was an infant first learning how to use my body. And so what are you supposed to think about? It was definitely very challenging and took some time to understand. And who even knows if I was thinking about it in the ideal way or the right way, but it worked. And I was able to pick up blocks, move them around, do a lot of kind of occupational therapy type tasks. But I was also able to do some more fun stuff where I was able to kind of reach out, grab a bottle, pour the contents of that bottle, then stir that with a stir stick, or I was able to play Guitar Hero, which is kind of more of our flashy demo that we did, but it was great because it showed that the system could do individual finger flexion and extension, as well as reacting quick enough so it wasn't, oh, I think about pressing a key and then 5 seconds later it actually happens. No, it was quick enough for me to actually play the game. And, that was something that just really opened my eyes, and being able to see that it is possible made me want to do anything I can to help get this technology out to myself and others like myself. I mean, that's why I'm here today. I have since been able to connect with a lot of other participants in other studies. We formed a group called the BCI Pioneers Coalition last year that's really to amplify the voices of the individuals that have been involved in research trials, and also help those in the future that may want to participate but may be a little afraid or scared or not understand everything that they're going through. Some of the other members in the coalition have been able to, like Jen just mentioned, Kathy was able to control a robotic arm to let herself drink her cinnamon latte that she loved. There's been others that have been able to do cursor control, or definitely robotic arms to move all sorts of objects. There have been some that have been able to use it for a flight simulator of flying an airplane and having that freedom that, people with disabilities just don't have that freedom. There's been groups that are working on speech, which I think is going to be the first great application for brain-computer interfaces, to allow people to express their thoughts and become human again, instead of being trapped in their own body. There's been individuals that have been able to use a driving simulator. I was actually able to do some of that towards the tail end of my study, where I was thinking about moving my hand, but I was actually controlling essentially a video game of a car. And if you think about then using that in your everyday life, that would allow me to be much more independent and drive a car much easier than any other capability and controls work. And now there's an individual that's continued on with some of that work out in California, and they're able to control it better than someone in the lab next to them that's able-bodied with an Xbox controller. And that's something that I think is really exciting, to show that these devices are allowing people to not only restore function, but also improve their agency, their employability, to get them back into the workforce and able to contribute to society, and really improving the quality of life. Jen just mentioned a little bit about disability quality of life years and how much that is taken away from people if they have a neurological disorder. And it's really important to be able to give some quality of life back to people, give them the autonomy to be able to control their environment and do what they need to do. So just to sum it up, the Pioneers Coalition is really a group that's set up to help think about the ethical side of things, but also mostly thinking about how these devices are going to improve the lives of individuals with living with disabilities, and how those individuals can gain so much more freedom in the future. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm really glad that everyone that is in this room is here, because I think this is such an important topic, and I've seen it happen firsthand. But now it's time to get this technology outside of the lab and into the homes and the community of individuals so they can live a better quality of life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian. Another powerful discussion and shared experience. Next, we have the last speaker of this section, which is Zoe Lalji of ALS Heroes, and she has slides she'll be sharing with us.
Hi, everyone. So before I begin, I would like everyone in the room and in the virtual room to close your eyes. Now imagine that all of a sudden you have an itch on your right cheek. Really feel that itch. And you try to will your arm to move, to scratch it, but it won't. Next, you try to call out for help, but the words won't come out. You're trapped. This is the reality for the 200,000 ALS patients worldwide who have lost their voice and your mobility to ALS, one of whom is my father, Dr. Ayaz Lalji, the founder and inspiration of ALS Heroes. Along with ALS patients, there are more than 150,000 people around the United States living with speech and motor paralysis. For these people, as well as ALS patients, BCI has the potential to return back to them pieces of themselves that they have lost. Many people can point to a day in their lives and say, that's when it all changed. For my family, that day was September 5th, 2017. My father, my hero, the man you see in this picture smiling so beautifully, woke up that morning with twitches all over his body. And 3 months later, he was diagnosed with ALS. It's bizarre how just 3 letters have the power to change your life so completely. Many of you may have heard of ALS from the Ice Bucket Challenge or from Stephen Hawking, but for me, ALS is the reason that my father can no longer tell me that he loves me. ALS is a neurodegenerative disease that causes the loss of the ability to walk, talk, move, and breathe on their own. For patients, they wake up every morning feeling as their body slowly starts to betray them. Nerve by nerve, muscle by muscle, limb by limb, they lose themselves to this disease with no hope for a cure or no current cure. For my father, his progression was uncharacteristically rapid. His diagnosis was in November, and shortly afterwards, in January, he was in a wheelchair, and following that in May, he completely lost his speech. For us, the hardest part has been the loss of my father's speech. The loss of the little things that used to define him, that used to make him such a unique person, and the father that I loved. My father used to be a jokester. He would say jokes all the time, and whenever any of us were sad and upset, he would not fail to brighten up our days with a little dad joke. 75% of ALS patients ultimately lose their voice and require some form of assistive communication. But for many of these patients, such as my father, these devices often fall short. Here are some of the options for these patients. The most common for ALS patients is the eye gaze, because the eyes are widely maintained throughout the progression. This device utilizes eye movement as an input and can convey about 10 words per minute in general. But this is far off from normal conversation that lies about 150 words per minute, and I believe that BCI can close that gap. This also poses a problem with using eyes as a nonverbal communication. With BCI, we can open up the eyes as a form of an extra mode of communication for these patients. The other options are touchscreen and switches, which are more options for earlier stages in the progression, when you still have agency over your voluntary muscles. Touchscreen utilizes touch as an input, and switches utilize a wide array of inputs based on the specific agency of each patient. For example, here you can see Stephen Hawking, who utilizes his cheek because he was able to maintain control over it throughout his disease. However, for our focus group, the only available option for these patients is eye gaze, since they've lost all other motion. So why then, if we have eye gaze, do we need BCI? Well, the reality is that contrary to popular belief, many ALS patients do lose the ability to control their eyes. In this study specifically, nearly 70% of the ALS patients had at least one ocular symptom, preventing them from effectively utilizing their eye gaze device. One of these patients is my father. He hasn't been able to use his eye gaze for more than 2 years. And in the meantime, he has had to resort to something as archaic as a letterboard, as you can see in this video. This video breaks my heart every time I watch it because it describes the reality of so many patients and my father's everyday life. He has to deal with this. As you can see, a letterboard is inefficient, frustrating, and time-consuming for both the patient and the caregiver. And as a result, patients have to be extremely selective about what they choose to share, even to their loved ones, and often have to neglect even some of their basic needs as a result. For these patients, BCI can be the difference between being completely locked in and unable to connect to full and true connection with everyone that they love. Watching my father slowly lose his ability to communicate has made me realize the true value of words. We speak approximately 7,000 words in a day, 2.5 million words in a year, and 200 million words in a lifetime. But we never seem to realize the true value of our words until they're taken from us. BCI has the potential to return these precious words to patients and allow them to not only express their basic needs, but also their innermost thoughts and emotions. This would mean the world for my father, and for my family, it would mean to be able to get advice from my dad again, to be able to get his perspective on things, to be able to hear him say that he loves us and that he's proud of us, and to be able to hear his dad jokes and snarky comments again. With the emergence of BCI comes a whole world of possibility for therapeutic impact, especially since cognition remains generally intact for patients. As I mentioned before, BCI can greatly improve communication for patients by improving their ability to connect with their families and decreasing isolation. For caregivers, it would mean feeling that direct connection with their loved one, as well as having that direct feedback on how to provide a greater quality of care. And also, the increased amount of validation and appreciation that they would get would help to decrease levels of caregiver fatigue and depression. For many of us in the ALS world, we believe that until there is a cure for ALS, technology can be that cure. This is what we believe within our foundation. And along with this belief, we put together BCI conferences alongside other organizations, one last October and one upcoming this November. Behind the BCI, there is a patient and there is a family who are looking for hope, for a better future, for greater connection with their loved ones. And I believe that BCI can be that hope. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. So at this point, we have an opportunity, and thank you for everybody for sharing these really powerful stories and some concerns and priorities in your journey. And we're going to have a Q&A with the panel. So we'll have virtual, and you can be seated, Lottie.
Stand up here.
Yeah, you can sit or stand. And you're mic'd, right?
Yes.
Okay. So to start off, does anybody have any questions that they've been from the room that they'd like to ask of our speakers thus far? Or Betty will also be monitoring the chat. Were there any questions in the chat that you wanted to? Okay, I'll give you some time. What struck me about all of you is talking about the need for these communities that you've been building, and also this multi-stakeholder community of all the participants that would be relevant in this therapeutic ecosystem. What were some of the ways that you found were most powerful in making those communities happen and mobilizing those groups?
For myself and some of the main computer interface pioneers in our group of the coalition, I think it's really just sharing their experience, because they've had this experience that roughly 38 people in the world have ever had. And that's something that's very unique. And we need to share that as much as possible and learn from that as much as possible so that these devices can continue to progress in the future.
Thank you, Ian.
I think for ALS Heroes, for ALS specifically, it's a very isolating and rare disease. So to just have that community feel that they're not alone, and to kind of gain from the experience of others that have gone through similar things that maybe are farther along in the progression, that can kind of be a guiding light for those patients and give them insight on what's to come and some of their options, and also just hope that things are still okay, even though maybe you've had some losses, that you're still standing and you're still chugging, to just have that as a hope.
Thank you.
And if I can comment on that as well, I think taking a broad view in terms of people living with neurological conditions, whether it's degenerative or whether it's something that you're afflicted with, that you live with, is really partnering with those with the lived experience to be able to help mindfully develop the technology. So we've gotten to a certain point where we're able to get in human, but even before we get into human, and then now that we are in human, we have to start to think about how that technology interacts with the human experience. And I think as we, not just as a research outfit, but also as we look to commercialize these technologies, is to be able to partner with those that you're working with to understand how that technology how it can evolve, but even more so how it impacts people's daily lives, something that we can't always see in a lab, but only through the outside world or society experience.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Jen. Yes, there's a question in the back. Please say your name and your affiliation. Can you wait for the mic so the virtual participants can hear your comment as well?
Sorry, I'm Ted Curtin. I'm the director of the Chemical and Biological Controls Division here at BIS. And for the patient advocacy groups, I was wondering if you've thought about how as these devices increase in sophistication and become more available, have you been thinking about how to treat data that might be acquired by the devices and the privacy issues behind that? That's my question. Thanks.
Thank you, Ted. Great question. So have you been thinking about the data acquired from these devices, and do those raise any issues for you?
Well, I think that, sorry.
Lottie,
Go ahead, Zoe.
Okay. I think that these devices
Zoe,
for patients, on a patient perspective, I think that we're really honestly desperate for any sort of improvement. And for my dad specifically, he just would love to just be able to communicate it all. And so for us, this device, regardless of the data, and maybe the data could be used in a positive way, but regardless of any data privacy issues, obviously it would be something that we would consider, but we would still definitely want to utilize BCI for the communication needs for the community.
Thanks, Zoe. Jen?
Yeah, thanks, Zoe, for that, for actually dovetailing off of what you said, is that when we think about data, yes, a lot of times people think about privacy and not being able to get it get it into adversarial hands. And that's always going to be an ancillary issue. But when we think about data in terms of interactions with the human body, how we can use that technology to improve the treatment. For instance, we're in the early developments of closed loop systems so that we can sense and take that data out of how the body's reacting and then use it for the intervention to improve the intervention. That's a fantastic use of that type of data. We recently did a project on depression, and so many people who have severe depression don't always know when they're failing, but if they were very open to sharing their data with their clinicians so that an alert can go out to catch them before they get into that black hole. So when we think about data, how we can use that data in a positive way, but also to put in the controls to protect people's privacy, particularly because we're dealing with medical and human experience data.
Thank you, Jen. Ian?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of general concern over, oh, they're reading my brain. Those are my personal thoughts. We need to protect that data to make sure it's not getting out to, or just really getting in the wrong hands of individuals. But like Zoe mentioned, and for me, when I was implanted with a device, take anything you want from the motor cortex. I'm thinking about moving my arm, take it. That's fine. I don't care if anyone sees that. If you're talking about speech, then yeah, it does get a little bit more important. And you need to be able to take that data and make sure it is secured and something that doesn't get in the hands of the wrong people. But at the same time, I think especially early on, it's really important to be able to take that data and manage it in a de-identified way so that everyone can learn, so that not every research group is trying to reinvent the wheel every single time they're trying to work on a new project. Especially with how few individuals have been able to use these types of devices, we really need to learn from every single person that's been able to use them so that we're able to amplify these technologies and translate them as fast as possible.
Yes, Jojo.
Hi, I'm Jojo. I'm pro BCI. And I think that one of my fundamental best ways that I learn about opposing points of view is understanding you as experienced users and beneficiaries of the technologies. I'm sure people have voiced their objections or concerns about privacy, ethics, legal, etc., of the use of BCI. So what have people presented to you in particular as something or a reason that we shouldn't pursue advancing BCI technologies?
I think some of the reasons that people are afraid or scared is a lot of the unknown. Because it is a relatively new technology, you don't know what all these types of devices are going to be able to do. You don't know how long it's really going to be able to last. Our study that I was participating in was supposed to be 12 to 18 months, and it lasted 7.5 years.
Yeah.
That's beyond wild expectations. But there's a lot of those concerns, but at the same time, like Zoe mentioned, patients are desperate. And we need to make sure that we're not letting perfect be in the way of good and being able to really improve the quality of life for individuals with neurological disorders.
Okay. I see we have a queue. So actually, is there a way you could form a line so that I can see who's who? So, gentleman in the back, do you have a microphone? Oh, I see. You have a mic. Sorry, apologies.
So Blair Casey with Team Gleason Foundation. I just want to quickly respond to your question. If we look at, what are some of the concerns? I think the evaluation of this technology, right? How is it applied? What technology is specific to the user? Access, coding, funding. I mean, these are all legitimate concerns that if we don't get this started, we will never get there.
Thank you. Okay, now.
Could I just add to that really quick?
Oh, Jen.
I think he just made a really good point on the fact of thinking of all those data points. But I think one data point that we tend to leave out is what happens when the technology fails. We get very excited about putting it into the human body, but we don't always think about the implications of when we take it out or when it fails.
Yeah, thank you, Jen.
Marcus Gerhardt, pro BCI. And I love the fact that Jojo just coined another term that we can all get behind. I'd be very interested in hearing what your respective experience has been of public and of private entities as you've gone on your journey, and very specifically what your experience has been of the collaboration between public and private entities.
Thank you. So some reflections on your engagements with public and private entities.
Oh boy, can I start that one off? Thanks, Marcus.
Please, Jen. Yeah.
The partnership between public and private is incredibly important, and it has led to really how these technologies have been developed. It's really our government agencies that have done the early investments and the risk taking on the discoveries of these technologies. And I think we have to recognize that. But it's also the partnerships with private enterprise where we can translate that technology for access and for better development. There's only so much that our government funding can do before private entities need to step in to further the development of the technology and also make it available. So the partnership between those two is intertwined, and it's incredibly important. One thing that I think that we need to do better at is filling the gap between the public funding and the private investment funding. We have to fill that gap and make that leap a lot easier so that we don't end up with technologies in the valley of death that can really have wonderful implications on our society and those living with neurological conditions.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, I think Jen covered it. I think it's all of this, all impact is based off of collaboration and teamwork and all these different minds coming together. And I think that's one thing about how great this conference is, because there's so many different minds in this room, and to just have those conversations and have that collaboration and different industry partners and public sectors depending on each other to make this a reality, I think would be.
Thank you, Zoe. Ian?
I would certainly agree. You know, Jen said it well, saying that it was the public funding that really got a lot of this technology off the ground. And now we are, you know, especially as patients, we're waiting on industry to push us across the finish line and have a device that I can use not in a controlled research lab environment, but something that I can take home and really push it through its paces and use it in my everyday life and let it impact my quality of life.
Thank you, Ian. I couldn't tell if there's a line back there, or those people just standing. No line, no more. Any other questions? And then Betty from would you like to share what the virtual participant questions are?
Sure, there's one question online from Philip Sabis. This question is for the panel. You all have extensive experience with interacting with the BCI research and industry community. Can you comment on your perspective on the extent to which we have delivered on our promises, over or under promising, scare versus hype, etc.? This seems relevant for understanding the real state of the field with respect to export control.
I think it's really interesting if you look at the kind of over-promise, under-deliver, or what is that? What is the capabilities that you're offering to these users? You know, there's been some groups that have put out timelines that are saying that, oh, we're going to have these in people right away. Before I kind of saw behind the curtain of the research, I anticipated that, you know, participating in this research study, it would be something that, okay, within the next 5 years, this technology would be able to be used. That's been almost 9 years ago. So I think there's a lot of challenge because patients are waiting, their quality of lives are decreasing, and we need this technology because it can work. We need it out into the hands and into the real world. But at the same time, I think it's been really exciting to see all the investment in the space, both financially and just the brain power of getting people that want to work on these types of devices that don't understand the day-to-day challenges that myself and others with neurological disorders face, but still are dedicating their lives' work towards helping those types of individuals. And I think that that's something that's been very exciting.
Thank you. Zoe?
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of hype. I think that it's been very hopeful for the ALS community to see that this is something new and exciting, and especially for patients that I described that aren't able to use the eye gaze. But even with patients for the eye gaze, this is just a whole new level of agency. And I think that so many patients feel that their brain is sitting in their body and not able to come out. But to literally put a chip in their brain and access that one part of themselves that they really have control over gives a lot of patients hope and makes them feel like they still have something to share and to contribute, and often they feel bottled up and like there's so much inside that needs to come out. And I think BCI can be that avenue for them to express what they need to. And it is a lot of hope. It is, many patients are waiting, for their turn to use this technology. And in a way, yes, it does pose an overpromising effect. Maybe if it takes a lot longer than we expect, or the trials fail, or it gets blocked up. But I do believe that some hope is better than no hope at all. And I think that BCI provides a lot of hope for patients.
Thank you, Zoe. Jen?
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, hope is incredibly important, but for those of us living with the conditions and the family members and caregivers living with the conditions, these solutions via the technologies can't come quick enough, right? We want them tomorrow. And we realize that can't always happen. But I think we have to be extremely cautious about how we use the media. I mean, Ian and I deal with this all the time with spinal cord injury. There's a new study that comes out that shows someone walking in a very strange way, and it gets up on on mainstream media or even on social media. And the next thing is we're fielding inquiries from people who are living with spinal cord injury thinking that they cured it, and they didn't. But we have to be very careful on how we use media, including social media, and how we create hype around the technologies. We have to be very careful on that and use it in a responsible way. But I also will add to the conversation on this is that it is incredibly important to have visions of where our technologies can go, because it's important for those who are the innovators to think about our next steps, to think about where we're going to be in the next 10 years. That's incredibly important. But when we come down to communicating with those of us living with the conditions and how those applications are, we have to be incredibly practical about what we can do today and what we are exploring now. So I think there's a bit of a realism that needs to come in the communication of the technologies that we have today, along with envisioning of what we can do in the future.
Thank you, Jen. Question from the back. Anna, please say your name and affiliation.
Anna Wexler, University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for 3 really powerful talks. I know it's not easy to share such personal experiences with a room full of strangers. My question is on the patient engagement side. So I work with a lot of academic investigators who are starting to see the value of patient engagement, and they know it's important, but they're just not quite sure how to do it. Aside from reaching out, right? Is there any advice that you have for them, or what should those investigators be thinking about, and what should they be doing?
Anna, thank you so much for that question. I want to go out and hug you. If I could be there, I would. If I can address that one first, sorry, I hate to be a pushy panel member, but really, the movement of patient engagement is incredibly important, and it helps to shape us. We're living in a device world right now, and we've learned a lot about patient engagement and how to do it properly from the pharmaceutical industry. They've taken and embraced patient engagement. and have helped develop tools on how to do that. Here in the United States, we have PCORI, and they have a whole toolbox on how to do patient engagement and how to do it mindfully and without tokenism. So we have tools today that have been developed in other industries away from medical devices that we can apply to medical devices today. And I see that we have folks from the FDA speaking later, and they'll also talk about some of the guidance that the FDA has in terms of engagement. So the hardest step is to recognize that you need to do engagement and engagement in meaningful ways, but there are tools out there. Yes, they're not perfect, but there are tools to get started and to help guide you on how to bring in meaningful engagement, and whether it's your research or if it's in your product development. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, as Jen said, I think it's awesome that academics are starting to see the value of getting that patient level feedback. And I think there's a lot of wonderful outlets to get that firsthand experience or feedback. There's a lot of channels, there's a lot of forums where patients speak very openly about their troubles, issues revolving around their conditions, and just kind of being informed by the raw aspects of being in their shoes and having that empathy and kind of putting yourself where they are and seeing what they want and what considerations they might have would be obviously a great informant for so many different areas. There are Facebook groups, there are advocacy groups, there are support groups, forums, open forums that have a lot of patients that just speak very openly about their challenges. Again, a lot of patients are just looking for connection and looking for people to understand them and really see what they go through. So there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of patients that really just want to share that. One of them is Everything ALS is a great forum where they have open discussion at the end of the presentations where patients speak very openly about issues that come up, different things that maybe we haven't considered that they go through. I know there's so many things that when my dad was diagnosed, we thought we saw everything that he might go through with ALS, but so many things have come up that you never really considered while looking at it from behind closed doors. And by getting that patient feedback about what they actually go through, things that maybe you don't think about, is just so valuable when considering how to help them.
Thank you, Zoe. Ian?
Yeah, I think both Zoe and Jen outlined some great rationale of different resources that are out there. One thing that I'd really like to highlight is the why. And why do you want patient engagement is the first question. Is it because it's required by the funding agency, or because you really want to develop the best type of device or the best type of technology? And I think that that's more than likely the case, and that should be the case. And you need to have those end users involved from the very, very beginning to make sure that you're not wasting time and resources going down a path that's not suitable for someone to use. There were multiple times where, things that some of the researchers that I worked with spent hours or days on that really didn't change the day-to-day of me using a BCI. But I think that that's something that is definitely changing. There's many more groups that advocate for that and help with patient engagement now. And it's really transitioning from individuals that are just seen as study participants versus now they're seen as study partners and really helping improve the technology.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, thank you so much for this partnership here today and for sharing these experiences with us. Let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. Okay. So we're about to move on to a break, and the transition, we're doing a really powerful thing here these 2 days, and we're engaging groups that often need to be at the table but aren't there. So the lived experience advocates and also the private sector who are translating a lot of these technologies out of academia and trying to promote that bridge. So we'll move into that in about 10 minutes. So take a 10-minute break and we'll come back here and we'll start at 10:40. Thank you.
Or you 2 minutes.
That Q&A was fantastic.
That was a great one.
Yeah.
It,
I'm glad we were able to
it
do this.
started off slow,
Yeah.
but y'all did some great work.
Just had
Zoe,
to pick
awesome
off a
job.
random word.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hi, can you talk or? Yeah. Oh, no. Where did he fall? Oh, okay. Oh, no. Did he call you or how? Oh, jeez. Okay, good. All right. Are you in transport? Are you driving right now in transport to St. Anthony's? Okay. Okay. They should have you might want to mention it. I'm sure Jane said this, is that they have his medical records there. So for them to look up his medical records, because his cardiologist and stuff is affiliated with St. Anthony's and at AWAD is too. So, oh boy. Yep. Yep. So at least get them checked in and, do the best that you can but, being there. There's going to be a point where, but I think you should stay there at least until he gets checked in, right? Is he conscious? Is he cognitive or no? Good. Yeah, I know. Okay. Can I do anything for you here? Good. I'm sure there was stuff that you were thinking of doing today besides your expense report. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back from your brief break. We've already had kind of our hearts and minds filled this morning with a lot of inspiration and a lot to think about. And now we're transitioning from a discussion of the background of this export control to the lived experience, advocates' insights, into a conversation around broader government investment and U.S. leadership in BCI. So we've got a great group of panelists. It's going to be Amy Cruz from Sartori Capital. We've got Lee Hochberg from Mass General Hospital in Brown, and we've got Anna Wexler from University of Pennsylvania. So I will go ahead and get you started here, and you can come up to the podium. And I'm going to be, again, a mean timekeeper. And we already saw how it was done earlier this morning, so we know we can do it.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to keeping me on schedule. Thanks so much for having me and inviting me to be part of this. This is a topic that I am exceptionally passionate about, and I will tell you a little bit more about that and why I'm so exceptionally passionate about it in a moment. The one thing I did want to share as I started is just the overwhelming investment that the U.S. enterprise has made in brain-computer interface technologies, both invasive and non-invasive, and I'll make a couple of comments about that. Which way do I point? There we go. But just to set the framing of when the U.S. started thinking about brain-computer interface technologies, this is from a paper from J.C.R. Licklider. He was one of the original DARPA/ARPA leaders, who actually is the guy who funded the creation of the ARPANET. His vision was actually around a man-computer symbiosis, and always in the context of that man-computer symbiosis as he envisioned it, and this was in 1960, was that these would be useful and assistive technologies to individuals, right, and to into the U.S. And so, it's really interesting to me to think about that the sort of the foundational elements of how we think about man-computer symbiosis now are really framed in the context of these assistive technologies. When I was a young program manager at DARPA, there's nothing better than having an older professor come and tell you that the program that you've started, they already did 30 years ago. Always a lot of fun. And so I was actually pointed back by one of these professors to the Cybernetics Technology Division work on biocybernetics, which was in the 1970s and early 80s, the instantiation of this man-computer symbiosis work. And again, you can see that it was always in the context of assistive technologies. Can we increase the rate of information flow? Can we get the brain to act like a parallel processor? Can we do this work non-invasively? And so this was actually some of the first non-invasive work that was funded in using brain encoding and decoding technologies, primarily EEG, although they experimented with a couple of other things in the context of using this as an assistive technology. Now, in the 1980s and 1990s was the first time that we started to see work both in non-invasive and invasive technologies for the restoration of function. And for me, as someone who, again, and I'll sort of reference this in a minute, was a program manager at DARPA, we could not have started the programs that we started at DARPA in the early 2000s without the investment from NIH, NSF, the Department of Veterans, Office of Naval Research, Army Research. All of these pieces built the foundational technology that then DARPA in the early 2000s was able to build upon. This is some data that was pulled together by a researcher in Amsterdam, actually, Pooja Rao, and I'm using her charts. And I'm using this chart because, first of all, I thought it was an outstanding representation of some of DARPA's investment in brain-computer technologies. Also, she calls out the difference between the invasive technologies and the non-invasive technologies. I would just like to run over to the chart and point at the big green bubble here. Pretty much 21 years ago to the day is why I moved across the country to come to Washington, D.C. was to work on the augmented cognition program because I believed that using my skill set as a PhD in neuroscience would be best applied in looking at how these technologies could actually be used by individuals. And so that was my motivation. This was barely 6 months after 9/11. And I left academia and sort of never looked back. And so as someone who, has been funding this for now 21 years, I feel like I'm throwing a really big, long Hail Mary pass to myself into the future. And I'll talk about that in a second. But this just gives you a sort of a little mind map of some of DARPA's funding in this space over the decades. And then not quite accurate in terms of the bars. I started several of the programs that were in the non-invasive space, including becoming the program manager of augmented cognition, accelerated learning. Obviously, you've seen the work from, the revolutionizing prosthetics program, neural engineering system design, and others. And so, for me, the one thing that's really critical about this is that you can see this sort of like really exciting bolus of activity. The BRAIN initiative was started in 2013 by Obama, and that really kind of gave a big shot in the arm to the brain technologies. And then in 2014, DARPA started the Biological Technologies Office. Much of the work that you see prior to 2014 was actually started in the Defense Sciences Office, where I was a program manager. And so really having the robustness of having an actual office that was focused on those types of technologies really helped increase funding in that space. And so also want to call out the NIH investments, the BRAIN initiative, estimated, I don't have the exact numbers, but estimated at least over $3 billion in terms of the dollars spent here, at least I would say $1.5 billion to $2 billion spent on BCI. And now, of course, we've seen the instantiation of Blueprint MedTech and the work out of NINDS in actually getting these technologies out into the space. However, the valley of death. For those of you that have ever received what I call now non-dilutive funding or non-equity funding, there is actually a real challenge in getting across that gap. Jennifer French mentioned it earlier when she talked about the technology. Where that funding ends and where commercial funding begins is so critical. And this is a problem that is not yet solved, but I think there are many, programs that are underway to start to address this. Sometimes it feels not like the valley of death, but a black hole, right? And the question is really getting enough activation energy, really getting enough funding to go across that gap and actually move into commercial technology. And the critical elements here are about getting that into commercial application. And I'll say a few words about that in a moment. But that's really critical. And so I want to say it's not just about surviving and sort of getting across that. It's actually about sort of like getting enough energy to kind of launch out of that space, because there are many of these technologies that we saw on that chart that have never made it into commercial application. And again, as someone who's been doing this for now 21 years, really want to see that happen. So I put the little jokey, this was a little meme that went around at Thanksgiving for the venture capitalist Halloween costume. It's a, jeans, a, hoodie and a vest and, anyway, but so I said, what role now? So I'm now a venture capitalist. I'm now an investor in brain-computer interface technologies and neurotechnologies from the other side. So I have literally thrown myself a Hail Mary pass from the past. And what role does venture capital have in this space? And right now, I'm calling maybe venture capital as an escape velocity, both in terms of assistive technology as well as neurotechnology. Easily $5 billion of investment have gone into this space over the last 5 years. That is hopeful. However, in order to have venture capital continue to fund these spaces, and again, we are talking about them funding clinical technologies, assistive technologies, direct applications to the medical space. In order for that to happen, there has to be a business case. There has to be something so that these venture capitalists know that there will be an outcome on the other side. And I think in the context of commerce and in the context of how we are thinking about funding, it is really important to balance these things. Because if we don't balance the knowing that there will be a commercial outcome and that we are actually going to get these medical technologies into the market, it will be very difficult to motivate venture capital and other investment into this space to really see these things realized. And so myself, as someone who's been investing in this space for about 21 years, I am both incredibly hopeful and want to encourage everyone to think about sort of the business case as well. I think we've done an incredible job. I think the billions of dollars that have gone into it have really enabled the type of investment that we're seeing now, but we are not there yet. And so just want us to hold that context as we think about the investments. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My good friend Violet has the presentation and she's getting it ready right over there. So I'm going to look to Karen. Don't press that start button yet. Yes, thank you. That'll work too. I'll introduce myself. Good morning. My name is Lee Hochberg. Here to tell you a little bit about the medical and the potential medical uses of brain-computer interfaces. I'm employed in part by the Department of Veterans Affairs, Brown University, Mass General Hospital, and Harvard Medical School. And the second slide, click, you haven't started yet, Karen, is going to be where I clearly disclose that all of my opinions and statement today are solely my own and do not represent the official position or policy of the Department of Veterans Affairs of the United States government. Having said that, let me look. It's not look. All right, so we're going to keep going. That's fine. The slide 3. I spend much of my time, and really what I'm going to be here to present in a little while, is about implanted brain-computer interfaces as an example of ones that may help people with paralysis, people with severe speech and movement impairments. Part of my job, though, or another part of my job, is to be able to help people in the neurointensive care unit. I spend some of my time as a neurointensivist, that is, I help people with acute injuries or illnesses of the nervous system, life-threatening injuries or illnesses of the nervous system. And there's a few things that, and I was on call just a couple of weekends ago, that I want to be able to say to anybody who's suddenly in the ICU. So for somebody who has a severe cervical spinal cord injury, who yesterday was moving without difficulty, but today suddenly can't move their arms or their legs, I want to be able to assure that person that they're going to be able to move again easily tomorrow. For somebody who has a brainstem stroke, who yesterday was able to move and to talk without any difficulty, but suddenly today is awake and alert, can hear everything, can feel everything, but can't move and can't speak, I want to be able to say to that person, you're going to be able to communicate easily again tomorrow. And for somebody with ALS, who I'm meeting either in the clinic or as part of our research studies, I want to be able to guarantee that person, to guarantee their family, that they will never lose the ability to communicate. This is the promise, this is the hope of brain-computer interfaces. To reflect on a couple comments, it's not the hype, I promise, but it is where this field is headed. It's not quite there yet, but in some of the videos that I will either pantomime or show you shortly, I do think it has great potential for the future, and that we actually are on the way there. Let me do a reality check, which was, we have the option of me opening up my laptop, and do you think I'm going to need the Teams info if you want me to do that? Oh, that's a good idea. So with that introduction, it's my pleasure to introduce Anna Wexler, which is from the University of Pennsylvania, who will be telling you about other types of brain-computer interfaces and their important impact. And see you in a little while. And this is, good, thanks, Amy.
Thank you for that introduction. Do I have slides? Yeah, okay, I have slides. Okay, well, I was going to start off by talking about the difference between what Lee was going to talk about and then invasive and non-invasive technology. So we'll just imagine that you've heard the state of the art of invasive brain-computer interfaces. And so my talk will take a bit of a different turn to talk about non-invasive BCIs. And I should say, by way of a larger introduction, I'm an assistant professor of medical ethics and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been studying the consumer neurotechnology landscape for about 10 years. And more broadly, my research focuses on ethical, legal, and social issues raised by advances in neuroscience. So in the previous 5-minute talk, we heard about invasive BCIs, so we're going to hear about them, but I'm going to be talking to you about non-invasive BCIs. So invasive refers to things that are inside the skull. Non-invasive are devices that record information or stimulate from outside the brain. And the first point I want to make is that non-invasive methods of brain recording and stimulation are not novel technologies. So brainwave recording technology using a method called EEG is nearly 100 years old. It was pioneered by a German neuropsychiatrist, Hans Berger, that you see here. This is about a century ago. So like Amy, bringing in some history here. I have more history later too. And this is a screenshot from his famous 1929 paper, and the figure that you see at the bottom is a human recording of an EEG in a 40-year-old man. Today, EEG technology is part of standard medical care used to monitor sleep and localize seizures. And as you can see from the schematic, it involves electrodes being placed on the scalp to record electrical activity from groups of neurons. And the brain signal is not as clear as what can be recorded invasively from, electrodes implanted inside the skull, what Lee's going to talk about, but you're still getting a brain signal. EEG is the most common technology used in non-invasive BCIs, though it's possible to use other brain imaging or brain recording techniques like the ones you see here, like MEG or fMRI or FNIRS, but they all have their trade-offs. So MEG and fMRI are expensive, they can be bulky, and FNIRS has its own technological drawbacks. So for these reasons, EEG is very cheap, it's portable, it's really just become the most commonly used technology in non-invasive BCI. So that's a very quick and very oversimplified review of non-invasive recording techniques. I mentioned I'll be talking about brain stimulation techniques as well. People, I think, know a little bit less about the history of non-invasive brain stimulation. It's actually a very interesting one. So non-invasive stimulation was, it was very popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s. You could see a device there that was a medical battery. There were hundreds of these devices on the market around that time. People used it at home, like this person here, and they applied electrical stimulation all around the body, including the head. And the same way that today we talk about taking medicine, back then people would talk about taking electricity. These actually fell out of favor in the 1920s and the 1930s. Today, non-invasive neurostimulation techniques are used to treat indications like depression, migraine, and obsessive compulsive disorder, among other indications. So at right, you see a schematic of TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which uses a magnetic coil to induce electrical currents in the brain. And at left is a schematic of electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, which uses electricity to induce a seizure, a therapeutic seizure, but a seizure. And this is a technology that was made famous, or some say infamous, by One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Okay, so I think it's important to keep in mind that these technologies are very old and that many are used in medical care today, specifically, talking about the non-invasive neurotechnologies. But we're, obviously all gathered here today for a reason. So what is new today? What's different now? Well, if you look to the media headlines in recent years, and we've, already started to talk about the hype, this is what you'll see. So this is from Forbes. Soon, Facebook will know what you're thinking. This is from the New York Times, the brain implants that can change humanity, questioning whether our daydreams are safe, how hackers can get inside your head with brain malware. Your tech devices want to read your brain. What could go wrong? Mind reading tech is dangerously close to becoming a reality. Elon Musk wants to hack your brain. How's the FDA going to handle that one? And the neural revolution is almost here. Should we fear it? And so I think this is just a slide that illustrates a lot of the hype that we've already talked about, hype that we're going to be talking about, I'm sure, through the rest of the 2 days. But if you look beneath the hype, right, I think the question to ask is, what is unique to the present moment? Why are we here today, really? And so I think, as Amy talked about, right, we have unprecedented investment in neurotech. The technological developments are fast-paced due to advances in AI, also the investment and other reasons. But what I want to talk about today is this third thing, which is that there's been development and marketing of neurotech for consumer applications beyond medicine. And I don't think we'd see the headlines like the ones I just showed you if the only thing that companies were thinking about was therapies for individuals with severe disabilities. And I'm not sure can't remember if I gave my disclaimer at the beginning that I have no conflicts of interest here and I have no financial relationships with any of the companies that I'm going to be talking about today. So I think what most people don't realize here, so I'm going to spend the rest of my talk talking about consumer neurotechnology and the consumer neurotechnology landscape and some of the applications. And what most people don't realize is that the consumer neurotech market has existed for about 2 decades now. And so in the early 2000s is when we saw the first consumer EEG devices come to market. They had 1 or 2 electrodes compared to the many electrodes that you saw earlier, and it's really unclear if these are actually reliably measuring brain signals. But the early applications of these devices were focused on object control. So in theory, you could use these headsets to wiggle some cat ears, do some very basic video game control, or fly a toy helicopter. But these never really took hold in the mainstream. They remained novelty items, probably because the signal wasn't all that reliable and they weren't really good at controlling the objects they're supposed to control. And so in the mid-2010s, we started to see a shift. And suddenly we get consumer EEG devices marketed for all kinds of wellness. And you can see here, this is a company marketing their headset. This is Muse marketing for mental fitness. Other companies came on the market marketing their EEG devices for things like relaxation and for focus, improving relaxation, improving focus. As I'll talk about later, I'm not sure that there is enough evidence really that these devices can actually improve these things. But you could see from the marketing imagery, these devices have been marketed to a whole wide range of ages, from the elderly all the way down to children. And today, looking ahead, we have the next generation of EEG devices that are in development, and I think we're going to hear from some of the companies later, being developed for applications like control, wellness, and focus. Also worth noting that beyond EEG, other kinds of brain recording devices are being developed. This one is a FNIRS device in development from Kernel. So there's, recording devices being developed, but also recording, efforts also being abandoned. So Facebook, that you saw in a lot of the headlines that I showed you, they announced a typing by brain project back in 2017 with a lot of fanfare, but in July 2021, they abandoned their project, and that was an FNIRS device. So I've taken you briefly through the landscape of recording devices, and I just want to give you a quick glimpse in what the consumer neurostimulation market has looked like. So in the early 2010s, we started to see consumer brain stimulation kits like this one come to market. This was part of a do-it-yourself brain stimulation movement, and I actually did my entire PhD on the do-it-yourself brain stimulation movement, so studying the devices and the people who use them. So these were the first sort of generations of consumer neurostimulation devices that came out. You had to put the electrodes on your head, figure out the wires yourself. They were marketed for indications like brain enhancement, cognitive enhancement. These are some of the things that companies were marketing them for. Power your mind, recharge your brain, unlock your brain's true potential. In the mid-2010s, we get the first out-of-the-box wearable consumer brain stimulation devices. So you don't have to mess around with electrodes or wires or figure out where to put the electrodes. You just put it right on your head and hook it up to, your phone. And today, the next generation of consumer brain stimulation devices are being developed. Seems like the applications here are still wellness and enhancement. And the one on the right there, I think, was on Shark Tank. I didn't see the episode, but that's what I've heard. And so when people first hear about this consumer neurotech market, the questions they have is, are these devices regulated? Like, who's regulating these claims? So in the US, consumer neurotechnology falls into a bit of a regulatory gray zone, and the situation is complicated, but I'll just say that, and I'll say that I've written about this before, but in short, the FDA exercises enforcement discretion, essentially looks the other way, for all low-risk devices marketed for general wellness. And that encompasses the consumer EEG devices that are marketed for wellness indications. It's less clear whether consumer brain stimulation devices, count as low-risk devices. But to my knowledge, neither the FDA nor the FTC or the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission have taken any regulatory action in this space. It's also worth pointing out, when we're thinking about rulemaking, that companies around the world are developing non-invasive neurotechnology. So as you can see here, these are just devices from Austria, Australia, and Serbia, although the consumer market is really very much US heavy. So it's important to keep this in mind. These technologies, at least on the non-invasive side, are very old, and they're widely available around the world. And to close, getting into the closing of my talk, I just wanted to end off with a few reflections from having been in this space and studying it for quite some time. And so in the consumer neurotechnology space, I would say it's my opinion, that companies' claims have largely outpaced the science. A colleague and I wrote a paper a few years ago called Mind Reading or Misleading, and we looked at claims made by consumer EEG companies and found that the scientific evidence to support various kinds of wellness claims was fairly weak. Second, the capabilities of neurotechnology are often overstated by the media. That's to say there's a lot of hype in the space, mostly from the media, but also from scientists and even from my fellow ethicists. So I think a lot of people are guilty of hype in this space, but to make good policy, and when we think about rulemaking, it's really crucial that we differentiate the hype from the actual reality. Third, it's not clear what value brain data will have for the average healthy consumer. So many media articles, if you're reading them, they sort of jump to these assumptions that healthy individuals are going to be wearing these devices, but the use case for consumers is not at all clear at this point, right? What are consumers actually going to do with this data? And there's really yet to be a use case, at least for the non-invasive stuff, that's really taken off. That's not to say there won't be one in the future, but it's a question that I have and one that I really don't see addressed in any of the media articles that I read. Fourth, I think this is a really important point for our conversations today, and this is the question of definitions is really not a trivial one. It's really, really hard to draw clear lines in this space. So what technologies count as brain-computer interfaces? So this wrist-worn device here, being developed by Meta, measures signals from motor neurons in the wrist. Is that a brain-computer interface? Is it a neural interface? What's the line between the two? Similarly, brain stimulation devices are not classically considered BCIs, but technically they are computers that interface with the brain, right? And you can imagine various other permutations where you can, question this definition of what a BCI is. Others have questioned whether we should even use words like invasive or non-invasive to draw boundaries, right? Arguing that you can have external techniques, like certain kinds of brain stimulation that directly impact tissue inside the brain. And, non-invasive is typically thought to be, less risky and less permanent. But for some non-invasive techniques, for example, electroconvulsive therapy, people don't have the same feeling that of non-invasiveness, right? That it's a very light medical intervention. And finally, this is a perennial question for ethicists, right? Where is the line between treatment and enhancement? In the neurotech space, we already have many instances where a specific technology is being used for medical purposes, but also the same technology is being marketed or used for wellness. Again, I think the definitional issues here are really important, and it's really hugely important when we think about proposed rules and which technologies they may apply to. And fifth, since much of the media coverage that I showed you in those slides, has focused on mind reading, that's been an issue that we're going to keep coming back to, I think, today. But in my view, protection of neural data is an important point, but it's also part of a larger data privacy challenge. So we have to keep in mind that we generate reams of data on a daily basis from technology that is already ubiquitous, right? From our emails, from our wearable devices. My search history, for example, is very revealing about me. Our voice assistants, my Ring cameras, right? This data is incredibly revealing about every aspect of who we are. And we don't have good protection for this data in the United States. So I think we need to be thinking about privacy of neural data, but we shouldn't lose sight that this is really a piece of a larger data privacy challenge. And it's actually possible that all the data that's collected about us now may be more revealing, I think, about who we are than our neural data will ever be. It's a possibility. And finally, since I began with a bit of history, I wanted to close with history as well. This is an article from a German newspaper that was published in 1930, a little after Hans Berger first discovered the human EEG. And this is the title, "The Machine That Reads Minds." Today they are still secret signs. Tomorrow they may perhaps reveal mental and brain illnesses. And the day after tomorrow, one may even be exchanging personal correspondence in brain script. So you could see that even 100 years ago, right, with the advent of EEG, people have wondered what could be revealed by brain signals. And people have also been wondering for a long time how brain technology, neurotechnology, might be used for nefarious purposes. So this is neuroscientist Jose Delgado. In his 1969 book, Physical Control of the Mind, he wrote, "Could drives, desires, and thoughts be placed under the artificial command of electronics? Fears have been expressed that this new technology brings with it the threat of possible unwanted and unethical remote control of the cerebral activities of man by other men." And I share these quotes not to suggest that we shouldn't still be thinking about brain privacy and the potential downstream effects of neurotechnology. We should be examining these issues and doing so on an ongoing basis. But as we do, I think it's really important that we stay very much grounded in the science and the current and near future capabilities of this technology and not get carried away by the hype. Thank you.
Anna, I'm going to just say this, please. No, it's okay. So while we get Lee set up, thank you, Lee. We're doing a little technical juggling here. I wondered if Anna, could you just say in a minute, and maybe Lee, you could also respond before we move into Lee's talk. You mentioned this maybe tricky distinction between non-invasive and invasive. I don't know if your mic is working. Can you tap it? If it's not working, you can come back up here.
Testing, is that on?
Oh yeah, go ahead. And then we'll put Lee on because it looks like we've got him ready.
Do you want me to elaborate on that? Or?
Yeah. Could you say a little bit about that tricky distinction, and that'll be a nice transition towards Lee.
Yeah, so I think this is a point. I mean, it's really, it feels like a nice way to be able to distinguish between inside the skull or outside the skull. But really, I think when you actually get into the terms, and this is something that other scholars have written about, people tend to associate things like non-invasive as sort of a proxy for thinking about something that's low risk or not permanent. And that's not necessarily the case for all non-invasive technology. And so you could also imagine an invasive technology that's very minimally invasive, that may not be as permanent and that may be less risk than some of the more, than some non-invasive technologies. So I think people have really pushed at that distinction, although it's one that's, obviously still very commonly used. I'd actually like to hear Lee's thoughts on that.
Thank you. All right, we'll move ahead just a little bit here. I guess I will move behind to say two things. One is that I do have the opportunity to interact through the hospital with some of the companies that are represented here today, and it's really the goal of doing so is to help to ensure that the absolutely critical, as mentioned earlier, industry translation of these technologies to the people who will benefit from them also benefits from the ongoing academic research and everything that we've learned over the past now 18 plus years of doing this ongoing brain gate clinical trial and other implanted BCI work. To the last discussion, I'll add the word implanted as perhaps a better word than invasive, and it kind of will help to clearly distinguish between different types of technologies, those that require a surgeon and those that don't, and there may be undoubtedly important risk-benefit questions that would be addressed there. And to some of the data that I'll show, just want to credit the great team who actually has participated in all of this, including the folks who are traditionally and have done all of the work who are in a smaller font on the right side of the slide, so they will deserve the credit for some of the data that I'll show you in just a moment. Describe some of these goals. They are real, and I'll return to them again at the end. And this is where I'll begin. So Karen, now you can press that button. What I was asked to do in part was to describe somewhat concretely what is a brain-computer interface, which many of the people in this room here but not everybody does. When I think of them, I think of a BCI as having three main components: a neural sensor, a decoder, and the thing that neural sensor and decoder are controlling, which we can talk about a technology or an assistive technology. If we think about somebody who has limited mobility or limited speech, we want to be able to detect their intention to move or their intention to speak. And there's some questions when one is building a BCI that we have to think about. What signal do we want to record? And there are lots of signals to choose from. We'll talk about those in just a moment. What area or areas of the brain do we want to record from? And then what sensor do we want to use in order to record that signal from those areas in the brain? This is the hardware component of a brain-computer interface. Once the signal is in hand, it then goes to a decoder or a filter. And this is the black box, if you will. This is the software component of a brain-computer interface. For somebody who's unable to move their hand, who's attempting to move their hand, if we can record a signal that is related to their intention to move their hand and convert that back into the movement of their hand, that software, often, of course, being kind of working on a computer, is a decoder, and that is the decoding or filtering part of a BCI. When we're thinking about building a BCI, we have to think what we're hoping that device will do. For somebody who's unable to move and unable to speak, if we can restore the ability to type on a computer screen or to control one's tablet computer, that would undoubtedly be of value to that person's quality of life, their ability to communicate with their friends, their family, and their caregivers. We've heard mention earlier today, appropriately so, of controlling other devices, some of which are listed up there, including functional electrical stimulation for the reanimation of a paralyzed limb. A lot of this field, I think, in the future will be used not only for restoration, but as a component of more traditional neurorehabilitation. So for example, for somebody who's had either a stroke or a spinal cord injury, to be able to improve the native control over one's limb by connecting the intent to move by recording neural signals back with some assisted movement of that limb. And as was just mentioned as well, possibly in terms of numbers, the largest impact that this field will have going forward is in the realm of closed loop neuromodulation, being able to record a neural signal, figure out what to do with it, and then act on it directly within the nervous system. And it's through any of these types of brain-computer interfaces listed there in the lower right on my screen and now on yours, are some of the diseases and injuries that I think the people who have any of these diseases or injuries will be helped going forward by brain-computer interfaces, including those who have injuries that result in disorders of movement or vision or sensation, or importantly, of mental health. I was asked just to think a little bit about what are these sensors, what is the hardware, and Anna just did a great job in referring to some of these. There are non-implanted versions of this. Near-infrared is a method for measuring the blood flow that is related to underlying metabolic activity. That's an option for a brain-computer interface. Scalp-based electroencephalograms, encephalograms, or EEG, are an opportunity. We're going to hear from multiple industry partners today who are developing other ways of recording field potentials, that is the summed activity of groups of neurons using either EEG or ECOG, that's electrocorticography. These are devices that can be placed either through or in a blood vessel, such as the superior sagittal sinus, or beneath the scalp, such as electrocorticography electrodes, or beneath the skull, subdural ECOG electrodes. I'm going to focus most of my discussion on the ability to record action potentials or local field potentials. These can largely only be recorded with devices that are implanted in the brain. They are the signal generators that develop the language of the nervous system. And the ability to be in the brain allows us to record this rich information, hopefully to allow people with severe speech and motor impairments to control external devices, to have improved communication and mobility. So with that in mind, I direct the BrainGate pilot clinical trials. These trials have now been going on since 2004 in various versions. And truly, just as an example of the great work going on in the field, we and others have been placing that array, which is a 4x4 millimeter array of electrodes, Utah array that there's Ian, was referring to earlier today, and Jen referred to it as well. That array tapped into the cortex, today connected by some fine wires to a pedestal that's secured to the skull and protrudes up through the skin, can allow then other connectors to be placed on it, allows for neural recording. That neural activity goes into a black box, the software part of the BCI that decodes the activity, and if everything works the way that we all hope it does, somebody with tetraplegia, just by thinking about the movement of their own hand, would be able to control a cursor on a computer screen. These are estimates. There have been 15 people in the BrainGate study, and as I think Ian mentioned before, about 38, plus or minus 2 or 3 folks around the world who have had an implanted brain-computer interface placed solely for neuroprosthetic research. Many more have had a BCI placed for the purposes of monitoring epileptic activity, that is seizure activity in the closed-loop control and hopefully decrease of those seizures. But pause for just a moment to point out that we're talking about 3 dozen plus or minus a few people, that's all, who have had an implanted brain-computer interface since 2004. So this field is early, and we're learning a lot, and we're learning it quickly. To sum up 13 or 14 of those years in a few slides, here are a few people using the investigational BrainGate brain-computer interface, either for control of a prosthetic hand. The gentleman in the upper right, somebody who has cervical spinal cord injury, using 2 arrays implanted in the motor cortex connected to 2 of these, which will soon disappear, 2 of these cables that are then decoding his intended brain activity. At baseline, he does not have the ability to flex and extend his elbow or open and close his hand, but by using this combination of technologies, able to feed himself the mashed potatoes that he requested. Woman in the middle there, towards the bottom, is Kathy, who Jen French wonderfully mentioned earlier today, as did others, taking that sip of a cinnamon latte, the first time in nearly 15 years that she was able to do so solely of her own volition. That gets the field to some of the demonstrations that were there through about 2017. To move a little closer to what we're all here today to think more about, here are 2 people with ALS, both mechanically ventilated, both with limited movement of their own hand. The woman on the left is thinking about moving her own hand to control an unmodified tablet computer. And she is simply sending an email. She's thinking about moving her hand. She's thinking about or intending to move it, to type 1 key at a time, and she's controlling not an assistive technology, but a communication technology, same one that would be used by some people in this room at this moment who are able-bodied for communication day to day, and by millions of people around the world at nearly every moment. Gentleman on the right, 2 arrays in the brain, 2 of the large patient cables that will get smaller and ultimately disappear. He's doing a YouTube search to learn more about ALS. Importantly, this is not the university laboratory. These are their homes, which is where we've been doing the BrainGate research since we began. So there are already examples, and have been for quite some time, of people using these devices, still being developed, but in their own homes, and gaining that experience is critical to the patient feedback, to the patient engagement that we think is so important, correctly so, in developing these devices to make sure that they work, not in the ivory tower, but where they actually need to work, which is in somebody's living room. One of the questions that's often asked from multiple perspectives is how quickly can somebody learn to use a brain-computer interface? The movie that I'm about to play is a kind of standard task in systems neuroscience called a center-out task. It is quite boring, but what it suggests I think is quite exciting. When I press play, which I'll do in a moment, the black box of the neural decoder knows nothing. It is naive, it has not yet been calibrated in somewhat more formal language. And when a gentleman with cervical spinal cord injury, whose perspective you have by looking at the screen, attempts to move his hand to control that cursor to capture the target, which is the red dot, the white cursor appropriately flies around because there is no software yet here, there is no decoder that would allow him to control that computer cursor. But thanks to David Brandman, who's formerly my PhD student up there in the upper left-hand corner, now assistant professor of neurosurgery at UC Davis, about every 3 seconds, the intention to move and the neural activity associated with that intention to move builds a new map. So now that about 38, 42 seconds have gone by, what was nothing became pretty good two-dimensional control over a computer cursor. This didn't require the learning of the participant, it didn't require learning of the user. It required 40-odd seconds of software to analyze the neural data, to understand what its intent was, and to provide for this two-dimensional control over a computer cursor. I have every confidence that this will also work for multidimensional reach and grasp type movements. It may not be 40 seconds, but it may be not months and not weeks, but I'm hopeful maybe hours, maybe even minutes, to be able to provide near instant, certainly very quick, control over external devices by people with tetraplegia. You're looking at a gentleman with tetraplegia. He is wearing a soft robotic glove, which is somewhat clothing-like. He does not have the ability to open and close his hand at baseline, but here he's thinking about opening and closing his hand using this investigational brain gate system, and that intent is being brought down to the glove that he's wearing, which is showing in still an early demonstration the ability to open and close his hand and actually to make a few different grasps. That's Jake Guzman, PhD student in the upper left, Sabrina Paganoni, neurologist at Mass General, and Connor Walsh, who's from the Harvard, his robotics lab that's developing that soft robotic glove. Let's get back to communication, which is so central to our human experience. If we can decode intended hand movements, perhaps one way to communicate, certainly for able-bodied people, is to handwrite, to take notes, as some people are doing here. What you're looking at in the green letters is what I would call a neural trajectory. It is the intended neural activity of somebody unable to move their hand as decoded from their real-time brain signals. And what you see 26 squiggles later is something that looks a lot like an alphabet. That handwriting is better than mine, by a lot. And that is one way that one could use an implanted BCI to communicate. But we can collectively do quite a bit better than that. I will now, in the interest of time, skip the math slide. But there are better, faster ways to decode this incredibly rich, this information-rich neural activity in order to decode the intended handwriting. It's Frank Willett, staff scientist at HHMI and Stanford, his great work in asking this gentleman, again, who has no ability to move his own hand, to answer the question that was placed on the screen. So this is one of our BrainGate participants who was asked where he was born. He's attempting to write with his hand. And what is being decoded in real time are each of those letters, reaching 90 characters per minute, about 94% accuracy out of the box, 99% accuracy, using all of the machine learning and natural language models that are now available. So in hearing Zoe earlier, and hearing others, to restore communication at this speed, I think has tremendous potential to help people with severe speech and motor impairments, including people with ALS. But as also mentioned, it's the ability to speak out loud, the ability to take verbal intent and to convert that into text or to speech that I hope will be one of the real wins, not for BCI as a technology, which actually doesn't matter, but for the people who will benefit from the BCIs that are being developed in this room. Here's a woman who has what's known as bulbar ALS. She still has some ability to move her hands, but as you'll hear, possibly in just a moment. You'll hear her attempt to speak. She can vocalize, but those vocalizations are not audible. We're going to ask her to say the phrase that's up there, and we'll at least see and possibly hear her. We'll see what happens here in just a moment as she attempts to speak and as we decode that attempted speech.
I don't want to call her a babysitter.
So we ask her to say that phrase on the top. She is attempting to speak. We are decoding that neural activity associated with attempted speech. And you can see her ability to do that. I'll play just one more of these movies. We're asking her what she's proud of here. Instead of giving her the answer to repeat or to copy, this is her free form answer. So again, as this technology attempts to restore communication and attempts to restore speech, there are now early demonstrations of good progress being made. Just a few more slides. Clearly, large cables will not be the future of any medical technology, but it was where deep brain stimulators and cardiac pacemakers began. One step towards a fully implanted system is the use of a wireless technology. Here's a percutaneous but wireless transmitter being used by one of our BrainGate participants. Gentleman there on the bottom, laying on his right side, fluorescent reddish or orangish neck pillow around his neck, and he's going to be controlling that tablet computer, again, just by thinking about the movement of his own hand. That music is particularly good for a number of reasons. One is that it's his own music. It's the music that he wanted to play. He has really precise control, not the same as somebody who's able-bodied, but really refined control, able to click on those small icons. And it's just a tablet computer. With my apologies to the great team that makes that industry-grade tablet computer. But this is what we want to restore. We want to be able to provide people with the ability to use the same technologies as they were using before their onset of disease or injury. And I should just to point out some of the key partnerships and the federal consideration being given to these. I don't know if you heard in the room some people laughing a bit in the background during that movie. You heard a little bit. Those were some of my deeply respected colleagues at FDA. Who were in the room, and I can just say as a sponsor investigator, when FDA laughs at your research, you're not quite sure how to take it. But I think in the presence of not only our regulatory authorities and our funding agencies in the room of somebody with tetraplegia using a wireless brain-computer interface is an opportunity for us to all to learn, and this was part of an FDA experiential learning program. It's an opportunity to learn how these technologies will be used in the future to gain that critical patient participant user feedback as we're developing these technologies and to put them to greatest effect as quickly as possible. So some of what we're doing in the field and what others across the country are doing in the implanted BCI research realm is listed up here, looking towards full, intuitive, 24-hour day, 7 days a week control over industry-grade, not assistive technologies, but communication technologies. There's a number of ways to do that are listed up there, whether it be for soft robotics, for limb reanimation, or functional electrical stimulation for limb reanimation, making these systems portable. These are all critical. I mentioned before towards the beginning, some of what I really want to be able to say in the neuro ICU as quickly as possible. I'd like to be able to say it next week. It's going to take a little longer than that, but I think this field is getting closer to achieving these critical goals. This is what motivates me, what motivates our team, and I know it's what motivates nearly everybody in this room. because our goal is to restore communication, to restore mobility, to restore mental health, and, noting the room that we're in, economic opportunity for people with neurologic injuries or disorders. This is a clinical mandate. This is an ethical mandate. And it's really a privilege to work with such a great team towards achieving these goals and to be with all of you today to think about them so carefully. Here's some of this team hard at work. And with Karen having told me to wind down, I look forward to answering any of your additional questions. And thanks so much for all of you that you're doing for this field of brain-computer interfaces. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nat, for being flexible and also for staying within the time so we could have some opportunity for questions at this point. So we've got about 15 minutes for some questions, and then we'll go into lunch where those of you who are here can continue the conversation. But I think what we just heard here was Amy gave a wonderful overview of the large investment ecosystem, whether it's from government investment to venture capital and private sector investment. And we also heard about this need to fill this gap and bridge communities of research to the private sector. We heard Lee talk a lot about implanted technologies, or what he was asked to talk about, I think, invasive technologies, but maybe implanted is the better word, and talked a little bit about not just doing that work in the research laboratory, but also making that research available in the context of the patients in their lived experience. And then Anna talked a little bit about how those technologies often translate into not just a medical context, but outside of that medical context into a consumer realm. And some of the technologies that Lee talked about will probably also make that transition. So I'm wondering if the three of you would like to comment a bit about how you see an ethical way forward to bridge that gap and some of the concerns that we can address in the context of even thinking about regulation, or maybe can't be addressed in that context. The big one. And I think some of you have some big topics you want to drop too, but I'll just open it with that and then see if anybody starts to raise their hand for questions.
Everyone's looking at the ethicist. What, I missed the last part of the question?
Just see how you might bridge that gap.
Are we talking about the gap between, like, from implanted devices being used?
From the laboratory to the commercial sector, how would we bridge that responsibly? And given in the context of, we're talking about regulation today, and I know that's a bit of your work, so maybe that is a good place for you to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for medical technology, for BCIs being used for medical purposes, which is it is the bulk of what we're hearing about today. I think there is a pretty clear pathway for that to happen. I mean, there's some questions, but there is an established framework, and there is guardrails to turn to that are in place. I think the larger questions are raised, especially when we think about implantable devices, is what's after that? And the CEOs, or one CEO of one company certainly has, CEOs of several companies have actually mentioned their desires for implantable devices to be used in healthy individuals for consumer applications. And that, for me, raises the biggest questions, is like, what happens if these are, become approved as medical devices? Do they then one day make their way for consumer applications? And what does that look like? And I think that's where the biggest question marks are now. Again, I don't know if that will ever happen. And I think the important thing now is that they are being developed for really important medical indications. And I think there are regulatory guardrails in place there.
Okay, thank you. So, Amy or Lee, do you want to comment?
I guess I would just make a comment around the non-invasive and the consumer technologies, as someone who, spent a lot of investment in the non-invasive space, and then in my own entrepreneurial career, worked on human performance and non-invasive technologies. I think it's actually, I think you did a great job of covering, it's a pretty muddy space. And I think that is probably one of the areas that could use more clear regulation, because when something is truly good, like when it actually has like clinical level efficacy, but is used in a consumer neuro application, it's actually really hard to tell the difference between like the crap, for lack of a better term, right? And so even having those conversations, somebody's like, well, I can buy that on Amazon. Why would I spend all this, And so I actually think that the non-invasive technologies are the place where the regulation is least clear. It's also, if I could just make a comment on the funding side, it's actually been one of the more challenging places for venture funding to kind of grab hold, because it is again a little bit of a muddy space. The clinical applications are much clearer in terms of the addressable markets, the populations, and how you might go about that. On the consumer side, it ends up being sort of a marketing effort, which is, complicated. So.
Right. Thanks, Amy. Lee, did you want to add?
I think and as I stated, the ethical and the clinical mandate to develop the implanted devices is clear. It is the primary driver for the, both the academic and the industry interactions that I've had. And I'm quite comfortable continuing to make sure that we develop these devices for those unquestioned medical indications. I think it's important. We are all here to consider, both out loud and otherwise, either in private conversations or publicly, the potential distant, maybe even remote, and not clearly possible ability for these same devices requiring a neurosurgeon to enhance or augment the ability of somebody who's able-bodied. That, to me, is so far down the road and unclear that I'm quite comfortable looking at one of my patients in the ICU or looking at the family members of people in this room and saying, we're going to keep those in mind, but you bet we're going to make sure that these devices are developed, they're developed safely, they're tested rigorously, and they become available.
Thank you, Lee. Amanda, would you like to go to the... Oh, you have it. Okay. Please introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Thank you. I'm Amanda Postelnik. I'm at the University of Maryland School of Law and the MGH Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior. Thank you to all our panelists for absolutely terrific talks. I'm wondering, what is the importance of international collaboration in your research? And what is the role of foreign non-US markets for total addressable market that would make it viable to commercialize the products that are developed in the lab? Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. That seems like an Amy question.
So let me ask you, I guess I'll answer one of the proximal questions. Strictly with my academic hat on, I want to be able to recruit the best talent in the world to develop these devices as quickly and efficiently and accurately as possible. Full stop. I guess not quite full stop. There are plenty of outstanding members of the scientific community, both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. There's a member of my own laboratory who's from one of the countries whose citizenship is in one of the countries that was named earlier today, that one might pause and say, is there a concern here? I'm perfectly fine with us all considering that question. I am really worried about being able to prevent the world's best talent from coming to the U.S., contributing to the economic viability of the eventual companies, just to speak, maybe not on their behalf, but to imagine what they might say. And importantly, to develop these technology to help Americans and others to recover from neurologic injury or illness. And I look forward to continuing to do so.
Right. I'll make a comment around the international markets from an investment perspective. Obviously, those represent really substantial spaces for these companies to work in. I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, there are quite a few patients in the US, but as we think about the aging population, certainly across the globe, if we think about Japan, if we think about South Korea and other places, just to name a couple, I think these technologies will clearly have international capability, and with the US certainly in the lead in terms of the investment and development of these technologies, it would seem, to quote Lee, right, it would seem very difficult to say, oh no, these are only, to restore communication in US patients, to the rest of the world. And so I do think but I do think it's important as we think about the commercial applicability as well. Thanks for that.
Okay, great. We have about 6 minutes, so if each person could move through quickly as you ask your question. So go ahead and please introduce yourself. You can say your name and affiliation. I can repeat it. Okay, Rob Franklin from BlackRock Neurotech.
So my question has to do with affordability and getting these products into the hands of the people that will benefit from them the most. So as we've noted, the populations for many of these products are small, and the availability of funding is also very small. The Congress just passed the 21st Century Assistive Technology Act at the end of last year, which was signed into law by President Biden, but it provided only $49 million in funding for the entire U.S., with many states receiving much less than $1 million. So many of these technologies, in order to benefit, need a surgery, need highly complex technical things put together. And how do you have any thoughts on how we can bridge that gap between the high cost to produce, high cost to bring these to market, high cost to actually manufacture each individual unit, and the ability of individual patients to pay for these technologies?
Thank you, Rob. Question about accessibility.
I mean, I think I'll just make a comment around reimbursement. I mean, certainly the reimbursement of the technologies is one of the things that we consider when we look at the investment space. And I do think that as the government looks at how we can pay for these, that there is, it's a balance, right? It's a sufficient coverage in order to allow the companies that have spent the R&D and all that investment to recoup that, as well as, make them accessible and affordable for individuals. We are assuming right now from a, investment perspective that these will be covered by insurance, and certainly don't want to see ourselves in a situation where someone has to pay out of pocket for something and is unable to do so, or you get into the situation like with gene therapy now, right, where it costs $5 million and, an insurance doesn't cover it. So my hope is that we are moving towards a space. I think the development of these neurotechnologies, I think we're seeing that they don't necessarily, we're moving to a place where they don't necessarily have to be bespoke in the long term. So I'm hopeful in that regard. I don't know, Lee, if you have any comments on the accessibility for patients.
We all want to make sure that the devices that we're developing are accessible to the people who will benefit from them. And that is an important, critical topic for the next couple of years, is how do we determine the outcomes measures by which we can measure the clinical validity and efficacy, and then compare that to the safety of any of these devices. That's one of the first things that we'll need to do. There's a parallel question, which is exactly what Amy was just referring to, which is how do we ensure that they're reimbursed at the level that they deserve? This is not my area of expertise by any means, but when I look at other implanted neurotechnologies, there are cochlear implants, there are deep brain stimulators, there are hundreds of thousands of people who have benefited from these. There is a path to get there. We may be in a unique space now with a really powerful suite of devices that are being developed. And I look forward as a community to figuring out how to get across the finish line. There's been half a century of federal investment in the development of brain-computer interfaces, the goal of which is to actually eventually translate that to a company that markets and produces and sells and supports a device that will be available to help people with neurologic injury or disease. It's not something that academia or academic medical centers does. That's the role of the company, and I think we all have to work together to make sure that we get to that finish line and hopefully get it to that finish line multiple times.
Thank
in
you,
multiple
Lee.
ways.
Wonderful, great. Why don't we, in the interest of time, have each of the people who are in line ask your question, and then the panelists can choose one of the questions that they'd like to respond to. So please concisely ask your question if you can.
Yeah, my question was actually...
And introduce yourself, please.
Sorry, Arlene Sales, Ionics. That's Institute of Neuroethics. I wanted to go back to an issue that Anna raised regarding the lack of clarity in the case of some definitions. For me, this is a question of communication. And I think that this may impact not only hype, people's expectations, but also the language one uses may be very much related or affect investments, funding. So I wonder who you think should be in charge of exploring how to communicate, how to use better terms to communicate among the different communities and with the public.
Great question. Okay.
Hi, Lucy Turnus, also with Institute of Neuroethics. Amy, you spoke a little bit about reimbursement. My question was based, we know in the US, insurance plays almost a quasi-regulatory role often on tech. So I wanted to know, we know examples where co-clearing plans are covered. We have examples of tech that do not end up getting covered, like gene therapies. How is this a blind item for you, or is that what is the process by which we start the analysis to know what steps need to be taken now to ensure insurances upfront?
Insurability and making sure new products go through that process and are reimbursable. Yes.
Hi, I'm Danny Powell with BlackRock Neurotech. I want to thank you all for the great discussion. I really liked how Amy and Anna, you highlighted some of these gaps between public perception versus what's possible, and also funding versus what's actually translating to the marketplace. And I wondered if, Amy, you could comment on how you think export controls could affect this translation between possibility versus marketplace.
Okay, well, a question about how export control will impact the market. So that was directed at Amy, so Amy, you could go and maybe the lead.
Yeah,
the others.
I wear both hats, right? I started out my career in the defense sector, and now I'm in venture capital and looking at the commercialization of these technologies. I'm, from my heart, concerned about the export control and what it might do to the industry, which I think, as I described as, hopefully escaping a black hole, a valley of death, right? And so I don't want to see anything, sort of limit that. I think there is, with many things in the regulatory space, I think there's a path forward. I think we have some great examples of opening up international markets while at the same time protecting against the use of technologies by adversaries. And so I think it's a conversation to carve that path forward. I don't think it's a binary outcome. So that would be my answer there.
I can take Arlene's question.
Great. Engagement.
Regarding terminology. And so that was about, who should be setting the definitions. I don't think there's any single answer to that, but I will say I think traditionally scientific organizations have come together and set those definitions, but clearly there's so many stakeholders in this space, and we heard from the really powerful stories of patients this morning. So I would think that in this case, right, it would really need to be a multidisciplinary stakeholder group that comes together, the patient voices involved to think about what those definitions are. And just very quickly on the comment of access, I think it's a really important question. And I think it's going to, there's this, people have brought up, right, there's this parallel conversation with these gene therapies, right? And there's actually really interesting literature and conversation there that, perhaps the neurotech space can draw upon. But I think it comes down to, is this going to be a bespoke technology, like Amy was saying, is going to be individualized for each person, which is part of the issue with certain therapies, or is this going to be like DBS, where you can have one device and one model that can be used in multiple populations and be made cheaply. And then just lastly, just to bring access made me I want to call back to a point that Jen French mentioned earlier, right, about post-trial access also to patients who have participated in these trials, right? So I think they're thinking about access in the near term, right? What support do they have for devices that are implanted in their brain even after the trial ends?
Right, absolutely. And I think the overarching thing to talk about the reimbursability and maybe tie it together is that I think we're having, it's going to be a conversation. There are multiple stakeholders in this space. They're, the folks that have participated in the past. They're the funders. They're the folks who are the front lines. They're the folks that are trying to keep their companies alive. And I really do think that, of all the spaces, I kind of put that it takes a village, thing on there, because it does, and that's part of the conversation. And I think the fact that that we as a community, like we are a community and we are leaning in these spaces. And I think we have a voice, and the more we come together, the stronger we are as a voice. That's one of the things I've enjoyed about working in the community and seeing all the companies working together. This is a yes and environment. This is not a one, winner take all environment as we talk about it from an investing perspective. And I think that's really critical.
Wonderful. So I think we're at time. We have a few virtual questions, but what we're going to do is we'll introduce those after lunch, and then there'll be an opportunity to address some of those, hopefully, in the Q&A with the private sector representatives who are going to be talking about BCI commercialization. So please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Wonderful. Okay, so we're now here for kind of a short lunch, but luckily you don't have to go far. It's in the back of the room. And what we're going to ask you to do is come back, let's see, let's come back at 12:35. Plan to come back then, so grab your lunch and keep the conversation going. You don't have to stop now. There's a lot of food for thought, food for thought, for you to absorb or ingest. Okay, thank you. See you at 12:35.
Yes. Yes.
I was hoping we get a chance to chat.
I'm not.
Thank you.
Don't suppose the sandwiches are over $20, but almost 50.
Yeah.
I can accept from.
Understood.
after each speaker, it's a speaker blitz where each is given 10 minutes or a little under 10 minutes, and then we'll have opportunity for 15 minutes for questions for that group. We'll have a break, and then we'll move into the next group. And I will ask each speaker to briefly introduce yourself and your affiliation, and then I will be looking at you with my timing gaze. Okay, so Matt's going to kick us off. And you're welcome to come up here, or you want to stay.
And I think
here's the clicker.
One of the questions that you raised about dual-use technology and military technology versus non-military technology, we are a company that is wholly focused on healthcare outcomes. We're building medical devices for people with unmet medical needs, but we were funded by the Department of Defense through the DARPA NESD program. The program manager that funded us, Alamondi, is sitting in the audience today. Very thankful for that. But I think that underscores that this concept of there are military uses and non-military uses, like in BCI, that distinction is a little bit weak. I mean, just to be honest, like if a colonel in the Chinese military is gardening with his son one day and then walks back into the house and it's a little bit hot and then collapses on the ground and has a brainstem stroke. If we provide that person a means to communicate with his son again, is that a military use? Is that, I mean, I would say that isn't. I would rather live in a world where we let medical technologies go throughout the world and accept that might help a soldier in another military. Yeah, perfect. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got to stick to the time. Yeah. Thank you, Karen. I'm Matt Engel. I'm the CEO of Paradromics. We are building a direct data interface for the brain. It is a modem for the brain that allows exchange of data directly between a brain and a computer. And maybe a little prelude then, I think that the most exciting thing that we can do with this is to address unmet medical needs in the neurological space. You've seen this quote before. It's not a coincidence. Actually, Zoe introduced it to me, and I just think it really powerfully encapsulates the promise of neurotechnology. I think for many of our companies, this could be a mission statement. The thing that's really exciting about building a data interface with the brain is that the brain is a data organ, and when you can talk to the brain in the language of data, you can offer technology solutions for patients where the underlying biology for the condition is maybe untreatable. And so I think a really good example of that, which we've talked about, is spinal cord injury or neurodegenerative condition like ALS. Reversing a severe spinal cord injury or reversing a neurodegenerative condition like ALS, those are aspirational goals, but they don't exist today. But right now, BCI it has the capability to allow someone with severe paralysis to communicate using data. So that is what our first application is to use a brain-computer interface, a direct data interface with a very high bandwidth to allow people to operate a computer by typing, by using a computer cursor, and we think, as you've seen from Lee already, even to be able to speak through use of a BCI if they've lost the ability to speak. I am super excited about what's happening in the BCI space right now. I mean, thanks to the BrainGate program that Lee has been the lead clinical investigator for, thanks to the Utah array from BlackRock Neurotech, and you're going to hear from the CEO of BlackRock Neurotech after me. We have just these incredible breakthroughs happening where we have someone speaking at 62 words per minute through a brain-computer interface. 62 words per minute is about 1 word per second. And you can just imagine how profound that would be for someone who was previously using a letterboard. That's really exciting. Imagined handwriting. All of these things right now have to do with intracortical microelectrodes, things that are inserted into the brain and can record signals at depth and record signals that originate from single neurons. Zooming in a little bit to this speech idea, I'll talk a little bit about some work from Dr. Frank Willett, and also I should mention from Krishna Shenoy, who passed away last month and was a leader in the field, and we're all going to miss him a lot. He was involved as a mentor for many of us in this room. The Willett study showed that you can communicate at 62 words per minute, but with the 124 electrodes that they were using in the brain to record signals, there was still a pretty high error rate. About 1 in 5 words were wrong, but they extrapolated that if they had had 1,000 electrodes of the same type, they would have been able to reduce the error rate to less than 2%, which is about 1 in 50 word error. We're building a system that supports 1,600 electrodes of the same type, intracortical microelectrodes, and so we're extremely excited about that outcome because, I mean, we're looking at a situation where now we could have a device that's supporting communication at a kind of reasonable rate with a reasonable error rate. This is the device that we're building. We call it the Connexus. It has four cortical modules. Each of them are very similar in form factor to the Utah array, but with 400 electrodes. They connect to a cranial hub that then connects down to a wireless transceiver at the chest. It's very similar in form factor to a deep brain stimulator in the sense that the lead goes under the skin and down to the chest, and then you have what looks kind of like a DBS IPG at the chest that communicates with an external transceiver. I'll tell you a little bit about the details of the system. The thing that makes BrainGate work the way that it does is that you have the ability to reach down into the cortical layers and record signals from single neurons. And that's part of the Utah array form factor is it has this bed of nails that sticks in there and gets right up against the neurons and records the signal. We love that, and we want to, and you'll see like anyone who's trying to build a high data rate brain-computer interface has to get deep in there. Otherwise the signal doesn't scale, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But there are things about the Utah array that can be improved if you want to productize the device and bring it to market as a long-term medical device. The materials for the electrodes, the materials for the coding, and even something as simple as using active electronics to allow you to multiplex 400 electrode channels onto a lead with only 8 wires. Having an 8-wire lead means that you can build a modular system where you can use traditional medical device leads to plug a cortical module into a hub, to plug more than one cortical module into a hub, connect the hub to the chest, and then exchange the parts if you have to for any reason. It also lets you get up to really high data rates. So 1,600 electrodes is a lot, especially in comparison to some of the amazing work that we've already seen with roughly 100 electrodes. Another thing that we're building that is right now technical state of the art is the wireless transceiver. So there are no wires coming through the skin. There's no like pedestal or risk for skin infection. Everything is under the skin. The power comes through the skin through inductive coupling between the external and internal transceiver, and the data comes out of the skin through an infrared link. Infrared is really fast. It's what optical networking is based on, and we're running our link right now at 100 megabits per second. It's also very secure because it's a point-to-point communication, so as opposed to kind of using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or something like that that's doesn't have the same level of physical security. One of the questions that I get a lot lately is like, do we really need to stick things in the brain? Like, because these Utah arrays, these Connexus arrays, they look kind of scary. They have little needles that go into the brain and record signals. And the answer is you don't need to do that for every application. But if what you're looking at is an extremely data intensive application, then you need to go in and get close to the signal. Each individual neuron, you can think of it as like grain of sand size. And just as like a mental model, if you're within 100 microns of a neuron, you can see an individual neuron speaking, you can see its activity. But if you get more than 100 microns away, you stop being able to record individual neurons. And 100 microns is a sheet of printer paper. So like in the Willett study, the neurons that are being recorded from are 15 sheets of printer paper away from the surface of the brain. And so if you want to build systems that do that kind of work, you have to get in there, and you can only really scale if you're at that depth and have a lot of electrodes. So this is kind of like the British have a saying, horses for courses. There are incredible technologies right now in BCI, and part of what we're probably going to talk about from the standpoint of like export control is understanding what types of electrodes do what things. In the same way that in transportation, like you wouldn't go to Home Depot on a bicycle and like pick up like 20 pounds of fertilizer. And you also wouldn't like try to go into a medieval Italian town with an 18-wheeler to drop something off. Like, depending on what you want to do and what your constraints are, you need to choose the right technology. And when you're a regulator, you need to understand which technologies can do what and what you're regulating. From our perspective, our design decision was based around data. We're like a back up the truck kind of company, because for assistive communication, for people with communication needs, the data directly translates to how many words per minute can you communicate with? And we want as many as possible. And so where we are right now in our clinical regulatory path is that we're getting ready for a large animal safety study this summer. We're looking to submit for IDE approval by the end of the year, and we're hoping to enroll our first patients in early next year. Leave you with a quick thought because I'm in my last 30 seconds. We have had contributions from people around the world coming to the company and working here. If we had to get a deemed export license to hire every person not born in the United States, it would have been disastrous for us then, and it would be very bad for us now. We have manufacturing partners in many countries. This is a huge international community, and I'd love to keep it international and collaborative. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marcus Gerhard. I'm very grateful to be the CEO and co-founder of BlackRock Neurotech. I'd like to thank you all for inviting us and making this happen, but I'd like to applaud the organizers for one thing in particular, which is that you ensured the day started off with the patient and the patient's stories. When I joined this field, I was and still am not a scientist or an engineer, very much to the dismay of my co-founder, Florian. And I joined a space that was full of geniuses. And what irked me after about 5-6 years, it takes me a bit longer to realize these things, I'm quite slow, was that when I would go to these great events called SFN, the Society for Neuroscience, where there are 20 to 30,000 people talking at very, very high level and very smartly and brightly about what cells do in the brain, what the brain does otherwise, and what applications might come out of the brain, I tended to realize that most of it was really a dating event because quite a few of the neuroscientists needed to find each other. But what irked me was not that part. What irked me was that everybody had an opinion of what the ultimate clinical product and application would be, what a medical device needed to look like. The clinicians knew, the researchers knew, everybody knew. The FDA knew, the CMS knew, the medical device companies that would get lost at this event would know. But I didn't ever see a patient tell anybody what they needed. And we changed that in 2017, thanks to Ian, where we asked him to take the podium and start telling his and other BCI pioneers' story. And that was, for me, mind-blowing. Was the point in time where life changed for me, because it clarified to me what this patient population was after, rather than what science was able to provide, what a company like ours was able to build, or what an entity like the FDA might be able to regulate or not. So to this day, I thank Ian and the other BCI pioneers, and most of my conversation now will be about patients. But before I go there, a brief synopsis of BlackRock Neurotech. Every patient you heard about today, every research study you heard about today so far has BlackRock inside. The technology that the clinicians or researchers cannot name at this stage but refer to as the 4x4 millimeter little electrode is BlackRock. It's the Utah array. Very grateful and very proud to be calling it the Utah array because it was actually invented in Utah more than 2 decades ago. This is the moment where investors leave the room because they think, oh my God, this technology must be vastly outdated. And others call it a bed of nails, and Matt, thanks again for repeating that. It's extremely useful. It is not, it's a radio. It's in your brain, yes, it's a radio, and it is listening to your neural data, and we need it because otherwise we will not have the efficacy that we need to provide to patients. But it was invented in Utah by Dick Norman. and then went on a fantastic development, being pulled into all sorts of different directions. And most recently, the circle is closed because its original intent was auditory, and we're now currently using the Utah Array as a next generation auditory nerve implant to restore hearing. The primary focus of BlackRock Neurotech is to restore function. And we have these catchy phrases of saying move again for paralysis, talk again for ALS, and even see again. That's not at human level quite yet. It's in animal testing at the moment through 3 or 4 different research centers. And by the way, all of these achievements are not ours. They are always a research institute, genius individuals at these centers together with BCI pioneers discovering and demonstrating the next thing that is possible. What have they been able to demonstrate? You saw some of the things, you heard some of the stories. I'd like to repeat a couple more. And I'll start with Ian, who I didn't even ask permission of, but he shared it with me and he didn't copyright or trademark it, so I'm just going to share it anyway. After 2017, we organized at SFN a big panel where we in fact invite 3 tetraplegic patients and an upper limb prosthetic individual, and they speak in a little room they gave us where 300 people fit. They said, well, this is translational, it's not really of interest to neuroscience. If you were talking about cells, then we could have given you the plenary session with 10,000 people. The room was packed, and Ian, Nancy, as well as Nathan talked about their stories, and rather horrific stories actually, because it included, you know, the suicidal period that nearly all of them went through after their accident. Ian very gracefully talked about it earlier as a difficult time. Well, in the case of Nancy, it was her husband closing the door to the pool because she was intent on committing suicide by rolling into the pool. It had the entire room in tears, and I think the only time I've ever been at SFN with standing ovations. Ian comes to dinner after this event, and I find out that Ian, in fact, and he says so, ironically got his accident while jumping into the ocean, but really was a car fanatic and would spend time with his brother racing cars, maybe potentially illegally, at late nights. And I asked him, what if we got you to drive a car again? And he was just, his eyes lit up. He was like, and this is the guy who talks about how, you know, he grabbed finally a glass of water, brings it to his lips and gives him independence, gives him an improved quality of life. So I leave the dinner, I call Florian, I said, can we connect the tetraplegic patient to a car? Ha, 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 laughter on the other side of the phone. Florian's like, look, buddy, nice try. This is science, this is technology. That's it. I was a bit demoralized. On my way back to dinner, this is 20 minutes later, I get the phone call from Florian. We can do this. We can do this. And Ian mentioned earlier, he was the first participant in connecting to a car simulator. The second participant, and it took him 9 months, he worked hard at this. I think